This page of N64 Magazine, yeah, I remember this one. It's got that big N64 logo splashed across the top. Classic, isn't it? Seems like they were pushing IS98 and World Cup 98 as the big game to play. Football games were always massive back then, especially with the World Cup coming up. Then you've got the main feature, Mission Impossible, with Tom Cruise's silhouette dangling down, trying to look all cool, though the N64 game, well, we'll see how that reviewed. They're promising world-exclusive screenshots, which was a big deal in those days, before the internet was quite what it is now. Elsewhere, they're banging on about Wettrick's Quake 64 feet and Yoshi's Story getting reviewed, so a good mix of stuff there. Looks like they've got some tips for Snowboard Kids, which was a laugh-bit kart racery on snow if you remember, and Mystical Ninja, that's Gambare Gomon if you were in the know, part 1 of a solution, so must have been a tricky one. And of course, GoldenEye 007, still going strong even then, 31 extra characters, blimey, and they're telling you how to blow Natalia out of a window. A bit cheeky for a kids mag, but that's the 90s for you. Down the bottom it mentions Japanese and US news and reviews. Always good to see what was happening elsewhere, especially with the Japanese games. Sometimes they were a bit bonkers. And a couple of small screenshots for GASP, Fighters NEXtreme and Olympic Hockey. Probably not the system sellers, but they had to fill the pages somehow, didn't they? Priced at £2.95, issue 15, May 98, yeah, those were the days. This page is a right blast from the past. It's a page from N64 Magazine, telling you all about how they reckon they are Britain's best Nintendo 64 mag. It's got a section called How N64 Magazine Works, laying out their credos like they don't give out a Star Game Award lightly, they actually play them properly till the end first, fair enough. They bang on about being independent from Nintendo so they can give honest reviews, and if a game's a stinker they'll say so, which is what you want, isn't it? They also make a point of saying they review games available in the UK, and don't waffle on about Japanese games you can't even get your hands on. Apparently their writers are proper Nintendo fans, so they know their stuff and cram the mag full of useful info. Then there's an editor's letter, looks like James Ashton is the editor, welcoming us to the mag. He's talking about an undercover month playing World Cup 98, and some sneaking about at Infogrames playing Mission Impossible. They reckon they were the first mag in the world to play Mission Impossible. Bit of a claim there. They also mention IS98 and Forsaken as decent games. They're introducing a new bloke to the team called Martin Kitts, who apparently has been gaming since the Spectrum 48K days and is into GASP, Fighters NEXtreme and Olympic Hockey. Sounds like a proper old school gamer then. They've even managed to get loads of Mission Impossible screenshots, 16 of them, that nobody else has apparently. The editor says he can't write much more because they're squeezing everything in, and he's looking forward to the next issue having a Z in it. Below all that there are loads of screenshots from Mission Impossible, showing off the graphics of the game at the time, which looked pretty good back then, all blocky polygons and whatnot. And at the bottom, it says May 1998, issue number 3. Crikey, time flies. This page of the magazine, right, it's the contents page. In it, big splash for Mission Impossible on the N64, claiming a world exclusive. Blimey, bit full of themselves, aren't they? Probably just means they got a slightly earlier review copy than the Americans or something. Page 36 if you're bothered. Then you've got the N64 Arena section kicking off on page 44, which is their review bit. Looks like Yoshi's Story is finally out over here. The review is on page 44. Remember waiting for that one? Looked pretty different from the usual platformers. They reckon it's a fabulous read, always laying it on thick, these mags. Following that there's Wheatrix at page 50, the Water and Blocks puzzle game. Can't say I was ever that fussed myself. Seemed a bit Tetrisoncy if you know what I mean. And then blimey, Quake 64, on page 52. Big deal for PC gamers back then, Quake, but on the N64, they're even asking if it's better than GoldenEye. Bit cheeky that, aren't they? GoldenEye was king. Habuyu. Lastly there is the Import Arena section, starting on page 54. For all the weird and wonderful games from Japan and America we probably wouldn't see on the high street. GASP, Fighters NEXtreme, page 58, apparently they're saying it's a Tekken beta. Yeah right, bet it isn't, no chance. Susume, Taisen Puzzle Dama on page 62, must be another one of those Puyo Puyo puzzle things, they always seem to crop up. And finally, Olympic Hockey, page 64, with Wayne Gretzky, but different. Well yeah, it's a computer game, isn't it? Don't think Wayne's actually on the ice playing it himself. Anyway, that's the gist of this page. This page is the contents page for the magazine. In it, right at the top, you've got the N64 Future Look, promising a gander at upcoming games. That's on page 6 apparently. Then there's Forsaken, blimey, remember that one? Guns, Bikes, Blood, Death sounds right up my street back then. That's page 6 as well. Bit confusing having 2 page 6s, but there you go. Then N64 International Superstar Soccer, like they say, no other football game on earth. Bold claim. Page 10 for that kickabout. GT 64 inches is next. Reckon it'll beat TGR, whatever that was. Must be talking about Top Gear Rally maybe. Multi-racing action. Page 14. And then World Cup 98. Big name, big reputation. Well yeah, it was the World Cup. That's on page 16. Moving down, there's a N64 how-to section. Guides to get you through life, eh? First up, it's Survive the Gaming Underground. On page 66. Sounds a bit dramatic. Then, Save Edo Japan from the Great Stage Plan in Mystical Ninja. On page 70. That'll be Mystical Ninja 64, I suppose. Next, Surf to Victory in Snowboard Kids. On page 76, yeah, Snowboard Kids. Bit of a laugh, that one. Then, find 12 hilarious quirks in GoldenEye 007 on page 82. Bet they are stretching to find 12. And finally in that section, the 30 most important people in the world, on page 108, claiming these are the people who make Nintendo great. Bit over the top, aren't they? Then there's Planet 64, their news section, starts on page 18. News Center they call it, with Mario waving an N64 flag, bless him. Coming soon. Section is on page 24, chatting about Pack to Bursting previews, Space Circus, Looney Tunes Space Race, and F-Zero X Camp. And at the bottom there's the regulars bit, with stuff like Information Station, Tips Extra, N64 Shopper, Club 64, Subscriptions, Back Issues, Directory, and N64 Magazine issue 16 inches, issue 16. Blimey, we were almost old enough to drive back then, weren't we? April 98. Goodness me. This page is a look at some of the big new N64 games coming out back in the day. Seems like issue 15 of N64 Magazine. The main game they're banging on about is Forsaken, calling it a Doom style in a 360 environment. Sounds alright, you know, another corridor shooter. They say, battle it out Doom style in a 360 environment. Get any better? The answer's yes. Always gotta be a bit over the top, haven't they? Apparently in the game, Earth's been sterilized by solar radiation and is now full of mercenary space bikers, with names like LAJ, Rex Hardy, and Beard. Oh, Beard? Really? These hairy monstrosities are fighting each other for a golden orb of matter. Sounds like your typical 90s game plot, all a bit daft really. There's a few little screenshots of Forsaken, looks like you're flying around in some ship shooting at robots and things in tunnels. One screenshot says, door is locked, hull critical. Always the same in these games, isn't it? Doors locking when you least want them to. Then there's a little list of other games this month. N64, they're asking, can the greatest football game ever, on any platform, get any better? The answer's yes. Bit keen, aren't they? It's just footy on the telly innit? You kick a ball about, doesn't change that much year to year. Then GT64, the thrills and spills of the GT Racing Championship on your N64. Racing games were always decent on the 64. And finally, World Cup 98, the only game with the official 1998 World Cup license. Well, that's something I suppose if you really needed that official badge. Warranty 8. At the bottom it says, want more new games? Check out the coming soon section of Planet 64 on page 24. Always trying to get you to read more of the mag, weren't they? This page is all about Forsaken, looking like they're really pushing this one for the N64. Aiken going underground, it says. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? They reckon it's going to be one of the most graphically stunning games so far. Bit of a bold claim. It's supposed to be in full 360 degrees. You're flying around on a hover bike. Sounds a bit like Descent on the PC, which they even mention. They say Forsaken is bigger, brasher and prettier though. We'll see about that. There are some screenshots dotted around, showing off some beam lasers for alien extermination. Sounds fun. There's a big boss called Dreadnought. Apparently you need to be armed to the teeth to take care of him, which is always the way, isn't it? Another screenshot shows some tanks in a hangar, and they reckon racking up kills is the key. One caption is pretty funny. Burn baby burn. Too much firepower for this lowly breed of enemy, methinks. Bit over the top, lads. It's got a played it stamp on it, so someone in the magazine must have had a go. Release date is July, for both the US and UK apparently. Published by Acclaim, so hopefully it's not another ZY Fighter, cause that was a bit pants. Anyway, Forsaken, going underground, sounds alright, could be worth a look if you're into that kind of thing. This page is taking a look at Forsaken, back in issue 15. It's all about that classic, kill everything that moves gameplay, you know the drill, blasting through tunnels. They reckon it's a bit Star Fox-like, which was always a good benchmark back then. Apparently there are some bosses too, like Metatank, and this Ramoan fella sounds like a right hard nut. The screenshots show some pretty intense action, explosions and robots galore. One caption even says, "Not so much a case of kill everything, as be killed by everything." Which sounds about right for these types of games, doesn't it? Another one mentions, "Moments from death at the hands of Cerbero." Cerbero sounds like a proper tough enemy. They're going on about the graphics being a visual treat, saying the lighting and explosions are jaw-dropping. Bit much maybe, but we were easily impressed back then, weren't we? They do say the movement is smooth like Turok, but faster and without fogging, which is a big claim. Remember all that fog in Turok on the N64, eh? Medstra. Control-wise, it sounds a bit of a nightmare. They're moaning about too many control options, like 14 of them, and it's a Turok-style setup with C buttons for movement, but they say it's not ideal for Forsaken with its vertical bits, and you're strafing with A and B. Trying to use the joystick Z and R to fire, and the D-pad for weapons. Sounds like you'd need to be an octopus to manage that. They're calling it highly confusing, which is putting it mildly. They're hoping for user-defined controls, which would be a lifesaver if it's as bad as they say. Anyway, it's on a hefty 128M cart, which was pretty big for the N64 at the time, so it must be packing something in. Sounds like it could be a decent blast if you can get your head around the controls. This page is a little look at Forsaken, one of those tunnel shooters, you know the type, a bit like Descent but on the N64. They're saying it's got a decent multiplayer setup, where you can blast your mates, or CPU opponents. Apparently, it gets a bit hectic with the speed, but the satisfaction of seeing your mates explode in a shower of blood is a plus, or so they say. Nintendo might get a bit squeamish about the gore, but Iguana, the developers, are chucking in a blood-on cheat code, which is a bit of a laugh. They mention the difficulty level might get tweaked, even though they managed to breeze through the first 4 levels. They've also got a battle mode where you fight against increasingly difficult CPU opponents, which sounds alright. They also mention a dodgy Casio keyboard tune that they hope will be binned by the final version, and some over-the-top American movie trailer voiceover guy. They're calling him a photoid, which is a bit harsh. There are some screenshots, one with a caption about eating scatter, flying trash cans, another about a green circle of doom, and something called Mr. Transpulse. One of the screenshots is showing a third-person view with a shield, and another mentions blue lights, meaning you're in a Goslow force field, which sounds like it could be handy for target practice. They reckon the game is fast and doesn't lose speed even with 4-player split screen, which is good for a laugh with your mates. They're saying to check out issue 17 for a full review in June, so we'll have to wait and see if it's any good then. This page is all about International Superstar Soccer 98, or IS-98 as it was known. Right then, the headline shouts that it's the sequel to the world's greatest football game. Which is a bit bold, isn't it? But back then, ISS was pretty top-notch on the SNES, or SNES as some people called it. There are a few screenshots dotted around the page. One shows a player kicking the ball, another has some officials or something, and then there's one with players in white and red kits, could be Peru maybe? Oh, and another showing the game in action. Looks like Brazil in blue are playing. You get a glimpse of the in-game graphics which, for the N64, were pretty decent at the time, blocky polygons and all. The article highlights new referee kits, updated team strips, and the replay feature. Standard stuff really for a football game sequel. There's a select teams screen showing the usual suspects like Germany and England facing off. And it mentions that all the World Cup teams are included, plus a few others to pad out the numbers. Even Wales apparently. Bless them. Then there's a bit in a box stating, IS-98 feet is from Konami, with release dates in June for Japan and the UK. June, eh? Summer of 98, good times. There's also an exclusive sticker with a star on it. Magazine exclusives were a big deal back then, weren't they? All in all, it's a fairly standard preview page for a football game, hyping up the new features and release date. This page from the mag is having a look at International Superstar Soccer 98 on the N64. Right good football game that was, especially back then. They reckon it was the best footy game about, better than FIFA, Actua Soccer, even better than ISS Pro on the PlayStation and Virtua Striker in the arcades, which is fighting talk. Apparently Konami have gone back and tweaked it even though it was already top-notch, and they reckon the results are amazing. They're saying if you just blast through a quick game you might not notice all the changes, but they are there. Controls are supposed to be the same, apart from the swerve button which has moved to the Z button which is a bit different. Graphically it's had a bit of a spruce up with better player animations, motion capture, even on goal kicks, which are like Schmeichel's, hip twister. They've even got players slowing down properly when the ball goes out for a throw, which is a bit of alright. Warrant? Weather's supposed to affect the game too, wet pitches and all that. They're banging on about John Ketley-style weather reports in the game, and that stadiums in Brazil and Africa will be warmer. Day and night cycles are in there too, like Castlevania 64. Matches will get darker as they go on, and you'll get floodlights and player shadows and all that, which is a bit fancy for the time. Castlevania. They are also saying about the clink of studs when you tackle and ref getting his cards out. New stuff they mention is players being able to dive, which might get you a dodgy penalty. Mid-air tackles are in, and they've got physios running on to treat injured players. Bit of magic spray, no doubt. Defensive walls can jump now using the Z button, and goalkeepers are cleverer, and there are 54 teams, stretchers, and team motivation depending on how you play. They even mention the captain's armband. All sounds very detailed, doesn't it? This page of N64 Mag is previewing IS-98. Looks like they're pretty chuffed with it. Right then, options they're talking about. Seems they've added a load more tactical options for your team. Way more than before. You can mess about with formations and player positions, even tweak individual player skills and looks, hair and all that. Good if you're into the nitty-gritty dressing room stuff, I suppose. Some people are. Views is about camera angles. Apparently, some folks grumbled ISS-64 didn't have enough choice of camera. Now they reckon ISS-68 has got loads more, even zoom, trying to be a bit like FIFA. They admit it's playable zoomed out, but prefer the default view from the first game. Sensible enough. Next up, referees. They're excited about referees. Blimey. Apparently IS-98 now has referees and linesmen on the pitch, and they're kitted out in proper FIFA gear. And digital boards on the sidelines. They are getting properly excited about this, aren't they? Each to their own, I guess. Celebrations, right. They've improved goal celebrations. Apparently there are new routines for goalies too, with Samba-style moves and all that. They mention a goalie with dodgy hair from Konami games, which is a bit random. Seems like they are saying the celebrations are alright, but maybe a bit too much. Finally, direction arrows. This is about aiming for set pieces. Instead of one arrow like FIFA, IS-98 has two. One for power, and one to adjust the height of the ball. Sounds like they've made free kicks and corners a bit more involved, which is fair enough, adds a bit more control. Jatat. Overall they seem to think IS-98 is a decent step up from the last one, loads of little tweaks and additions. Referees though, really? Still, each to their own, and it was a good footy game back in the day. This page then, is all about International Superstar Soccer 98, or IS-98 as we all called it back then, for the N64. Looks like they're pretty chuffed to have Tony Gubba doing the commentary in this one, calling him the final and most prominent addition. Bit much really for a commentator. Still, Gubba was alright I suppose, doing all sorts of sports commentary at the time. They're saying his commentary is better than last year's toiler, whoever that was, and they've forgotten his name, which is a bit brutal. Apparently Gubba's got some interesting lines in the game, like about Uzbekistan sounding like a Hungarian meat dish. Right then, looking at the screenshots, it's certainly looking like classic ISS. Still blocky looking players mind you, but that's what we were used to on the N64. They've got the scoreboards showing Jackson versus Vugolo, and another match South Africa against Japan showing 10 in both. There's a little box mentioning a player called Gallagher, comparing him to Gallagher but without a license. And you can easily change his name, which is a bit cheeky. Another box is about FIFA subs boards and new warm-up routines, saying they're brilliant and asking to stretch those legs. Standard footy game stuff really. It ends with a to be continued, and says there will be a review in the next issue, so we'll see if it lives up to the hype. This page in N64 Magazine has got an exclusive first look at Ocean's brand new racing game, simply called GT. Big, bold letters, right in the middle of the page, you can't miss it. It says GT, it's the only way to. Doesn't quite finish the sentence, bit dramatic aren't they? This page, there are a few screenshots dotted about. Looks like a pretty standard arcade racer for the time, polygonal cars on city tracks. One shot shows a replay feature which is apparently nicely automatic in a fixed camera sort of way. Helpful I suppose. Another bit mentions that 4 of the 6 circuits are based on real Japanese street tracks, which is probably a good thing for fans of that kind of thing. They're also making a point of the sparks coming from under the cars. Must have been a big deal at the time. They reckon fans of Japanese GT cars will recognize the cars and drivers, so it's clearly aiming for that sort of crowd. Standard racing game stuff really. This page then, is a look at GT64 on the N64. Seems Genki are having another go at a racer. They reckon it's a follow-up to multi-racing, remember that one? Apparently this is proper GT racing, even better than F1 racing. Only better they say, bit cheeky. It's got all the GT motors in it, Porsches, Lamborghinis, and even the Nissan Skyline. though they do admit that's maybe not quite as glamorous. Visually it's looking decent enough for the N64, they were impressed with the backgrounds, and reckon they've got rid of that foggy look in the distance. 6 different circuits, some proper racetracks, and some city streets too. Gameplay-wise it's meant to be more of a simulation, so you have to brake properly for corners and all that, not just arcade-style mashing buttons. There's some screenshots showing the game in action, you know, racing cars, speedometers and your position on screen. They're promising a full review next issue, and they're wondering if it'll be any good, ending on a strange question about bolts from the blue. Bit daft, isn't it? We'll see if it's any good when it comes out in June, I suppose. This page is showing off World Cup 98 inches for the N64, which they are calling FIFA's grown-up World Cup cousin, whatever that means. It's got these chunky polygonal graphics, proper late 90s style. They're making a big deal about the goal celebrations being nicely over the top, and England drawing with the Swiss, which, yeah, pretty standard for England back then. Apparently the goalkeepers are now a good deal more intelligent, which we'll see about that, won't we? And they're banging on about real-life sponsors' hoardings to make it seem official, because nothing screams realism like blurry pixelated adverts. It says it's out in May, both in the US and UK, so must have been around the corner at the time. Looks like you can have up to 4 players battling it out, which would have been good for a laugh with your mates, even if it probably controlled like a tank compared to what we're used to now. World the game's afoot is a bit dramatic, isn't it? It's just football, lads. This page gives us a look at World Cup 98 on the N64. Right away they're keen to stress it's not just another FIFA game, even though it's from the same stable as the FIFA games and might borrow some bits and bobs. Apparently saying it's just FIFA with a different hat on is way off the mark, and they really want to get that straight. They're pushing the fact that it's the official World Cup game, which was a big deal back then with all the licensing nonsense. Graphically they reckon it's a step up from FIFA Road to World Cup, especially the detail on the players, though they do have a bit of a dig at them still being a bit ugly. Kits are spot on, and they've even nailed the 10 stadiums from the France 98 World Cup, so you'll recognize them if you were into the footy architecture, whatever that means. Gameplay-wise they say it's a bit confusing at first if you're used to FIFA controls, but you'll soon get the hang of it. It's still got the C button controls and analog stick, but they mention this compression technology which is supposed to make the button presses react quicker, which is always welcome. They also like that you can adjust the game speed, which is good for those who thought FIFA 64 was a bit sluggish. Presentation sounds like it's getting the full EA treatment, with John Motson on commentary, and even that tub-thumping song for the intro, which was everywhere back then. They reckon it's going to beat International Superstar Soccer, or ISS as we called it, in capturing the whole World Cup vibe. They're still playing a beta version, so they're expecting some bug fixes and tweaks before it hits the shelves, but they're already pretty impressed with how it's shaping up visually. It's all building up to a showdown with ISS, when they both properly launch. This page of Planet 64, issue 15 from May 1998, seems to be breaking news about Nintendo getting their act together in Europe. The big headline is, Nintendo Unite Europe, and it's all about them setting up a new Central European headquarters over in Germany. Apparently, up until now, things have been a bit of a mishmash across the continent, with different distributors all over the place, even in Germany, Switzerland and Italy, doing their own thing. This new setup, Nintendo of Europe, or NOE they're calling it, is meant to streamline things. It's mentioned that Shigeru Ota, who used to be with Nintendo of Japan, is heading it up. They're making a big deal out of it being a wallet-bustingly magnificent 2.4 million European sales of its 64-bit Wonder Machine, that's the N64 of course, and how this new office will oversee everything. They reckon it'll mean better release schedules for us here in Europe, which would be a blessed relief, to be fair, instead of always getting games ages after the US and Japan. They even have a bit of a dig at the old way of doing things, mentioning companies like BMG and Virgin who used to handle things. The writer ends with a bit of typical British sarcasm, joking about the Nintendo bigwigs hoping to sort things out quickly so they can get back to sun lounges in Mallorca. Cheeky. Gree. There's not much in the way of game specifics on this page, it's more about the business side of things. The picture is the usual Planet 64 globe character, looking very pleased with himself while playing an N64 controller, as always. Standard magazine stuff on the sides with staff names and issue dates. So yeah, seems like Nintendo Europe is finally becoming a proper thing, could be good news for us gamers in the long run. This page from the magazine is a bit of a news roundup really. Up at the top in the shortcuts section, they're banging on about some new N64 games that have just popped up. Acclaim are doing some sort of adult cartoon game, whatever that means. Then there's South Park, which was a bit of a laugh back then, wasn't it? Apparently it's a bit sweary, which for South Park is hardly news. They also mention Lobotomy Software, who did Quake on Saturn, are doing Caesar's Palace on the N64. Sounds riveting, not really, Oh, and Prince of Persia 64 is coming, which could be alright, and apparently Gremlin are doing Actua Golf, and Rare are working on a Gran Turismo type racer. Interesting. Rank. Then there's a big article shouting, Game Boy, now in colour. Crikey, colour Game Boy, who'd have thought it? They're saying it's finally happening after all this time. Apparently they wanted to combine the colour of the SNES with the old Game Boy. Bit ambitious. It's coming out in October, in a grey box, and costing about £99. They reckon it'll play all the old games and make them colorized, which is a nice touch. And they're even making new games just for the colour Game Boy, with Rare and Nintendo involved. Apparently, it'll have 56 colours from a palette of 32,000, and games will use a reduced palette of 10 colours. Sounds a bit like the Super Game Boy on the SNES. They reckon it'll have the same battery life as the old one. And they're even mentioning Mario 64GB. Now that's got my attention, maybe. It's going to be at E3 in Atlanta, apparently. And lastly, there's something about the GoldenEye Spy Master competition finishing. Sounds like it was a big thing, loads of entries, and apparently the prizes are really good. But the winners won't be announced until next month. Typical. Still, they reckon it'll be worth the wait. This page is an article from the mag about the Tokyo Game Show, back in '98. Looks like Max Everingham went along to see what was going on with the N64. Apparently it's Japan's big gaming convention, and by the sounds of it, a bit of a squeeze, even more so than E3 in the US. The article mentions that Nintendo, Sony, Sega and Microsoft were all there, even Nintendo despite it being a show about their own console, which is a bit ironic, isn't it? Seems like the reviewer wasn't blown away by the N64 offerings. He mentions the lack of new N64 games being a bit disappointing, especially as the last show was only 6 months prior. Konami was there showing some football game, and some other smaller companies were trying their best. However, Takara gets a mention for their game Choro Q64, a Nintendo version of their racer, Choro. It's due out in July in Japan, and apparently has 4-player split screen and a course editor, which sounds alright. There's a picture of it in action, with some colourful graphics, and right next to that screenshot, there's a picture of a lady, looks like a promotional model for Takara, nothing wrong with that I suppose. There are also some smaller pictures scattered around the page, one of a massive crowd at the show, another of some game screens, and one of a bloke in a giant yellow eyeball costume with his tongue sticking out. Bit odd that. And at the bottom of the page, there's a photo of some blokes cutting a ribbon. Probably the show opening. Nothing too exciting there. Overall, the impression is the show was alright, but maybe not the most amazing for N64 fans looking for loads of new stuff. More RPGs and adventure games than action it seems. Still, always good to see what's coming, even if it's a bit underwhelming. This page, alright, let's have a look. It's one of these show reports, games industry thing, probably ECTS or something like that. Right at the top, we've got some stats, numbers of people attending, space taken up, the usual guff really, who cares? Then there's a breakdown of what platforms are showing up. PlayStation is still dominating, no surprises there. N64 presence is tiny in comparison, bless. Categories wise, simulation and action games are popular, adventure and RPGs are there too. Looks like the usual spread you'd expect. Warrington. Moving down, Taita was showing off this board game thing called Medzazaze Resort. Sounds a bit naff, like a virtual Monopoly. The reviewer doesn't seem too impressed, calling it a sort of Monopoly. Not exactly groundbreaking stuff, is it? Then there's Hudson, they were pushing Bomberman Hero and Battle Phoenix. Bomberman Hero, yeah, remember that, bit of a departure for Bomberman going 3D, wasn't it? Battle Phoenix sounds like some kind of simple shooter for kids. Maybe they were trying to broaden the N64's appeal beyond just Mario and Zelda. And the rest section lists a load of games quickly. Banpresto, Culture Brain, Video System, Acclaim, Taito, T&E, quite a few there. Sonic Wings Assault, Super Augusta Masters, Art of Extreme G, some Puyo Puyo Game, Robot Spirits, and Tonic Trouble. Mostly stuff that sounds a bit average, not really system sellers. Worry. Konami are the big boys on this page though, talking about their footy game, ISS, or International Superstar Soccer. Looks like they are bringing out ISS 98, which became World Soccer, GQ winning 11-3 in Japan, and ISS Pro 98 here. They're banging on about improved AI, new tactics, camera angles, the usual yearly tweaks really. They're also showing off GQ Power Pro Baseball, sounds very Japanese, says it's big over there, probably not gonna set the UK charts alight. We're not exactly baseball mad, are we? Gee. Lastly, there's Human talking about Airborder 64. Says it debuted early, which is good for them I suppose. Sounds a bit like Top Skater, but maybe not as polished graphics-wise, but promising. Good control and track design. Apparently there's even park swings in it to boost your score. How very Tony Hawk. Could be a laugh, might be a bit pants, we'll see when it comes out properly. So yeah, that's the page, not exactly earth-shattering stuff, mostly sequels, and a few quirky bits. Standard mid-1998 N64 fare really. This page from issue 15. Blimey, that takes me back. Right, let's have a look. Pure Gold starts off with HMV flogging a gold memory card for a tenner. 1 whole megabyte, can you imagine? Good for a few save games back then. It's Your Destiny. Oh yeah, that beat 'em up. They reckon it's doing well but going out of fashion, hitting number 1 in the UK N64 charts. They're a bit snobby about the American charts though, saying it's only scraping the top 20 over there, and slagging off Mortal Kombat Trail. Doy. Travesty? Travesty. Anyway, they're calling it blood spattered, and poor God's way of doing things. Bit harsh, lads. Then there's Milking It. Bizarre. An ad for Lancashire Dairy's milkshake, to inspire your gameplay. Shake in groovy bottles. Right then. Down the page, Fanzine Farm, always a bit bonkers. Sounds like someone's fanzine printing got burnt out in a fire, and they are salvaging what's left. They're advertising their own fanzine, Famicom Go, and another called Extreme Consoles. They're reviewing Mario and Pilot Wings and Broken Sword 2 on the PlayStation in Extreme Consoles. Seems a bit random. To get a copy of Extreme Consoles, you have to send £1.50 and a stamp to some bloke in Essex, and for Famicom Go, it's £1 to a place in Manchester. Bit of a faff. DIY Games, a competition to find young game developers. Dave Jones, the Lemmings geezer, reckons there's always room for creative ideas. Prizes are 10 grand, and they're hoping for brains bursting from their ears. Good luck with that. Finally, new goods. They're looking at a Blaze Jolt pack, 256 inches, rumble pack for the N64. £14.99. They say it's a much stronger rumble than the standard one. Apparently they didn't think there was anything wrong with the original back in issue 13, but this is worth £14.99 of anyone's money. They reckon it's good for Lilac Wars, as long as the volume's loud enough to drown out the incessant electronic buzz. 86% they've given it. Not bad at all. Yeah, typical N64 Magazine page really. Bit of everything. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's got a section called Retro World, with Jason Moore, taking a look back at the Famicom disk system, remember that? Nintendo's attempt to do discs back in the 80s. They thought it'd be cheaper than cartridges, and a way to stop all the pirate copies floating around. They're talking about the machine itself, the burgundy color, and how it's slotted into the Famicom. It's funny looking back now, all these add-ons you needed. They mention Pac-Land on the disk system, saying it came from a cartoon, and that it's been converted to loads of formats, but the Famicom disk version is apparently the worst, getting a measly 34%. Ouch. Then there's Halley Wars, which sounds like a typical top-down shooter, with comets and hidden bonuses and all that. That one got a much better score of 72%. Seems like they were a bit hit and miss, these disk system games. Warrington. Over on the left, there's a bit about Dave Jones from Body Harvest, apparently Scottish and the brains behind it all. Says he was working down Gateway for peanuts before realizing he could make games. Good on him. And at the bottom, there's an advert for a Blaze memory card, 256. £7.99, down from £9.99. Cheap as chips really. They're saying it's good for games like Snowboard Kids, Mario Kart and Quarterback Club. Remember worrying about memory cards back then? Good times. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Spaced, which turns out to be the rather less excitingly named Space Circus when you look closer. Seems to be a preview of this game coming from Infogrames. They're banging on about how in space no one can hear you scream, which is a bit dramatic for a game with a clown in it, but there you go. Apparently it's supposed to be one of the best space set N64 games of '98, we'll see about that. They've got some snaps from a development kit, saying the N64 version looks almost as good as the PC one, which is always a good sign, isn't it? They're going on about a sweat-addled, espionage-laden Mission Impossible game as well, but the main focus is this Space Circus. It's a 3D adventure thing with a traveling circus in space, and you're this clown bloke juggling stars and using a chameleon tongue, apparently. Sounds a bit bonkers to be honest, but could be a laugh. There's a little box out the side that says this month including, and lists a load of other games they're looking at, like Looney Tunes, Space Race, F-Zero X, Body Harvest. Remember that one? Airwitter, Space Jelly, Robotech, Crystal Dreams, Silicon Valley, Turok 2 and Banjo-Kazooie. So a fair few bits and bobs coming up for the N64 then. They've even got little quotes saying Space Circus is very French, according to someone called Ocean, and that it's very lovely indeed, according to themselves, which is nice of them. 7 worlds to explore, searching for new circus recruits, and something about a post-apocalyptic Earth environment, which does sound a bit more interesting than just clowns and stars. This page then is having a look at Looney Tunes Space Race for the N64. Seems like everyone was jumping on the kart racing bandwagon back then, wasn't they? After Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, Infogrames are giving it a go with the Looney Tunes license. Timber the Tiger and Diddy Kong are out, and Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote are in, along with the rest of the usual suspects like Daffy and Porky Pig, all racing on futuristic hoverbikes in space naturally. Kinevy, they're banging on about how it's got that cartoon look nailed from the screenshots, and it's looking pretty colourful. Apparently they're trying to get the physics feeling right, saying it'll feel a bit floaty. We'll see about that. They reckon the multiplayer will be decent with up to 4 players, and Porky Pig will pop up saying that's all folks if you come last, which is a bit of alright I suppose. They're hoping it will be better than the Diddy Kong Racing alternative, which is a bold claim. It's due spring '99 over here, so still a bit of a wait. But it might be one to keep an eye on if you are into your kart races and Looney Tunes, I suppose. This page looks like a bit of a snapshot of what was coming up on the N64. Right in the middle, big and bold, is Enemy Zero, which turns out to be about F-Zero X. They're saying it's the latest update from Nintendo about the 16 to 64-bit jump, and they're pointing out that the characters are familiar from the SNES version, which is a nice touch for us old-timers who remember the original. Apparently there will be 18 courses and loads of races. They mention Captain Falcon, Samurai Goro and Jodie Summer, so the usual suspects are back. They reckon there's some new races too, like this Octoman fella, a mechanical octopus apparently, which sounds a bit bonkers. They're going on about vehicle stats, like speed, durability, grip, and boost, all rated, and all the machines are named after animals, which is a bit of a weird detail. The reviewer is having a bit of a chuckle about the races being drawn in a muscular Marvel Comics sort of way, and being two-way cute. Sounds like they're not totally convinced about the art style, maybe a bit too much for a Nintendo game. Worry. Then there's a section called Eager Waiting, Lost in Space, about other games. Body Harvest is mentioned, been waiting for that one for ages apparently, and they're hoping Nintendo in Europe will pick it up finally. Space Jelly is another one, sounds a bit odd, some kind of cute blaster thing from Software Creations, who did stuff like Plock on the SNES. Then Robotech, Crystal Dreams, Take-Two, are publishing that now it seems. Been going on for ages, they are a bit pessimistic about it ever seeing the light of day. Lastly, Silicon Valley, which DMA Design is doing, they were on about it last month and now reckon it's more of a September release. Take-Two are publishing that one too, or was supposed to be. Sounds like a bit of a mess behind the scenes. As usual, with games development back then, you can't win them all, they say at the end, which is about right, isn't it? This page is all about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time for the N64. It's an RPG news page, and they're clearly very excited about this new batch of screenshots. The headline is, Just in Time, making you think they're unsure about the release date, which sounds about right for Nintendo at the time, always a bit secretive. There are a few screenshots dotted about. One shows Link on horseback, and they're joking about it being a bad horse, naughty horse, and how Link smashed something and it's a rupee bonanza. Another one shows Link fighting a giant skull spider, with a funny reference to the film Arachnophobia and Jeff Daniels. They also mention the graphics, saying the shafts of light and real-time shadows are good, and they appreciate Shigeru Miyamoto and his team's attention to detail. The text talks about the Zelda publicity bandwagon, and how Nintendo is creating a storm of media attention without really saying much about the game. They mention Shigeru Miyamoto and Shigeru Yamauchi being involved. They say it's astonishing that there's still no final Japanese release date, just a vague April, even though it's clearly a massive game everyone's waiting for. They reckon this Zelda will be one of the most eagerly awaited games of all time. They think the screenshots look absolutely gorgeous and are impressed by the real-time lighting and shadow effects, especially the transition from day to night. They even cheekily asked Nintendo for a copy of the game at the end, bless them. Sounds like everyone was properly buzzing for this game back then, and rightly so, looking back at it now. This page then features a Zelda 64 preview section, where they are calling it Chesty Morgan, bit cheeky. It talks about fighting plants in dungeons, and nicking treasure. Classic Zelda stuff really. They point out Navi flashing red when there's danger, and Link's basic wooden sword and shield, early days it seems. There's also an Ask Fusoya bit, looks like a Q&A section. Someone's asking about rumors on the internet, and if they're real. Fusoya is saying Capcom are keeping quiet about N64 plans despite rumors, and mentions a Project Cairo RPG from Crave, and a Namco RPG, apparently a follow-up to Tales of Phantasia, which everyone knew was on the PlayStation as Tales of Destiny. Bit of a blunder there from Namco if you ask me. They also touch on Fushigi no Dungeon 64, and Fire Emblem 64 as internet rumors, and Hybrid Heaven as a new type RPG from Konami, cracking on with development it seems. Someone called Cameron Smith is asking about Zelda's release date, Everyone was back then, and Fusoya gives a standard PR answer, saying they'll tell us when they know. Right at the end, Fusoya bangs on about preferring 2D RPGs, bit old school even then. I suppose some people never moved on from the SNES days. Oh, and they want you to send letters to their bath address if you have questions. Proper snail mail back then, of course. The next page in this issue then kicks off with Rex Appeal talking about Turok 2. Seems like a claim of showing off new screenshots and hinting at a name change, though thankfully they stuck with Turok 2. Seeds of Evil in the end, didn't they? The reviewer is impressed with the graphics, mentioning the skinning of polygons and the level design, moving from a ravaged city to medieval settings. They also talk about the enemy reactions being like GoldenEye, which was a big deal back then. Oh, and multiplayer deathmatch and team play are confirmed, which is always good news for a bit of after-school fun. Then there's I'm Ready for Banjo-Kazooie. More screenshots flooding in from Rare, which is always exciting when Rare are involved back in the day. They're highlighting the real-time intro with Gruntilda, and a witch doctor turning Banjo into a spider. That sounds properly bonkers and very Rare. They mention a riddle involving a banjo-headed sphinx, and a talking shark. Typical Rare humor that was. The reviewer sounds excited about both games actually, reckons Turok 2 looks like something out of Robin Hood but without Kevin Costner, and jokes about the shark in Banjo looking a bit scary. They are definitely building the hype for these titles coming out soon. Finally, there's a little section called An Ear to the Ground. Chorokyu 64, a racing game, is mentioned as being like Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing, and you can create your own vehicles. Sounds alright, but they say the PSX version was a bit average. Then there's Desameron on the SNES, a shoot-'em-up construction kit coming to the 64DD, which, let's be honest, not many of us ever saw. Roadsters 98 is also mentioned, a new racing game, with licenses for Porsches, Mercedes, BMWs and Mazdas. Blues Brothers 2000 is coming too, a 3D adventure like Tomb Raider, based on the film. Sounds a bit ropey to be honest. And an N64 version of MTV's Superfemme Aeon Flux is in the works. Lastly, they mention Rob Cohen, who made Turok's 3D engine, has left Iguana and started a new company, and EA have nicked the WCW license from THQ, and Tetrasphere developer H2O are doing a 3D platformer. Blimey, lots going on in the world of N64 then. This page is talking about Nintendo in Japan dropping the price of N64 games, because apparently the PlayStation was doing rather well at the time, outselling the N64 10-1. It says, blimey. They've knocked the price down on a bunch of games as part of a spring campaign. Games like Star Fox 64, GoldenEye 007, Mario Kart 64, Mario 64 and Blastoza, they're all now going for 4,800 yen, which isn't bad. It sounds like they're hoping other shops will drop prices even further. The reviewer even saw Donkey Kong 64, Famista 64, and Yoshi's Story for under 3,000 yen, which they reckon is about 15 quid. There's a picture of the Yoshi's Story box and Famista 64 box next to this bit. Tuako. Then there's a bit called Grow Up or Throw Up, where they are talking about a new game idea from the people behind Osumo 64. Apparently they want to get magazine readers involved in making a monster-raising game called Wanagai Monster, or Please Monster as a working title. They're asking for readers to send in ideas for cute and comical monster designs, and if your design gets used in the game you get some unspecified goodies. They're even wondering if those goodies might be pocket monsters, which is a bit of a tease in it. There are some rough monster drawings pictured there. This page then features a few bits and bobs. Up at the top left there's a moan about Nintendo Power Magazine in Japan being a bit slow to release its second issue, which is always a pain when you are waiting for the next hit of news and game info. Just below that there's a piece having a dig at ASC2 for making mirrors themed around Aerogauge to celebrate sales of the game, which sounds a bit desperate if you ask me. I mean, who wants to look at themselves in a mirror covered in Aerogauge logos every morning? Oh! The main article is called An Englishman in Tokyo, with the catchy subtitle, Itai. Hey, that hurt. It's about Japanese TV variety shows. Apparently they are a bit bonkers, featuring things like live on-screen fish murders, and talent shows, where people wrestle with eels. They mention a chap called Tamori-san who wore a scarlet G-string on TV. Bit much, even for Japanese telly I suppose. Then there's a bit about Japanese athletes being modest at the Nagano Olympics, quite a contrast to some of the chest beating you see elsewhere. The writer talks about snowboarder Yuri Yoshikawa and her positive attitude after a fall, and reckons he's going to try and support her by playing 1080 degrees on the N64, using an ironing board for practice. Quirky. There's a Learn Japanese section with some useful phrases, like how to say, that's cheap, and, next time eh? Handy if you were planning a trip to Akihabara to pick up some imports. Warrington Naucus. Finally there's the top 10 chart. Yoshi's Story is sitting at number 1, which makes sense, that was a lovely looking game. Diddy Kong Racing is at number 2, a solid kart racer in its own right back then. Japan Pro Wrestling is at number 3, which is a bit niche for us Brits but each to their own. Then there's Discovered on the 64, Tamagotchi, Baku Bomberman, Famista 64, SimCity 2000, Hyper Olympics in Nagano 64, and Puyo Puyo Sun 64. Rounding out the list at number 10 is NBA in the Snore, Zone 98, a slightly sarcastic title for a basketball game. Perhaps it was a bit dull. Fair few decent games in that list to be fair. Takes you back. This page is diving into the mission. Impossible game on the N64, remember that one? It seems like it was a bit of a troubled project right from the get-go. The article says there were technical issues, team disagreements, and even Tom Cruise himself wasn't chuffed. Sounds like it was heading straight for development hell. They started working on it in San Jose, but then packed it all up and moved it to France to try and get it back on track. Apparently this mission, Impossible, was supposed to be one of the N64's big launch titles, aiming for a summer release, but it sounds like that was never really on the cards. The magazine is having a look at what went wrong. They were trying to make it a proper spy game, not just a run-and-gun shooter, more about being sneaky and clever, using disguises and all that. The screenshots they've got here show some menus and bits of gameplay. You can see levels set in places like an embassy and a train station, and they mention Prague as one of the locations. Looks a bit rough around the edges, typical early N64 days really, blocky polygons everywhere. Let's see if they can pull it together and actually get it released then, eh? This page then is a bit of a deep dive into the mission. Impossible game for the N64, back when it was an exclusive apparently. It's all about how Viacom and Tom Cruise, being the big cheeses behind the film franchise, were laying down the law on what the game could and couldn't do. Sounds a bit restrictive, doesn't it? Apparently proper sneaky gameplay was the order of the day, as they were keen to avoid too much violence. Unlike GoldenEye, where you could just slap people about for fun, they make a point about how shooting should be a last resort in mission. Impossible. There are a few screenshots dotted about, showing the typical blocky N64 graphics of the time. One seems to show some fisticuffs, which they claim is more realistic than GoldenEye's slapathon. Another shows a chap in a guard uniform, and another has the classic mission failed screen, so looks like it could be a bit tricky then. There's even a little hovercraft or something in one of the pictures. They mention how Rare were free to put as much violence as they liked in GoldenEye, you know, sneaking up behind someone and all that, but Mission Impossible was going to be different, more about thinking your way through things rather than just blasting. They even mention Goemon in comparison to Mission Impossible as an action-adventure, so they're positioning it in that sort of space but with more stealth. It seems they were a bit worried about its troubled development history, but were pleasantly surprised, saying Infogrames did a good job pulling it together, and it could be one of the big N64 games of '98. Bit of a bold claim, we'll see about that, eh? This page from N64 Magazine takes a look at the camera system in Mission Impossible on the N64. Those 3D cameras, always a bit of a mixed bag back then, weren't they? It mentions how they try to give you a good view, but can suddenly switch angles at the worst moment, usually when something nasty is about to jump out on you. They reckon Mission uses 3 camera types, a default third person like Tomb Raider, which was all the rage then, good for wandering around outdoors. Then there's a first-person view for aiming when you hold R, and an over-the-shoulder view for chases, a bit like Shadows of the Empire, handy for indoor bits where the normal camera struggles. Moving on, there's a section called SUBPEN, which is about the first mission. Ethan's undercover in the Baltic, sneaking into an enemy submarine pen to grab some gear and sort out the pump control room. Looks like you need to be sneaky, shoot out lights, avoid getting spotted by guards, and watch out for trucks driving around, and ammo might be a bit scarce. Apparently there are items scattered about the place to find. Then we've got BOAT, which talks about the boat mission, naturally. After all that sneaking, it's time for some explosive action. Ethan needs to escape in a gunboat, blowing up enemy bits and bobs as he goes, including a gas plant. They mention enemy gun emplacements and gunboats trying to stop you. Standard stuff. Controls are simple apparently, left, right, up, down and fire. Can't get much easier than that, can you? Oh, and it mentions 2 IMF team members, Clutter and Downey, helping you out. So yeah, typical action-packed stuff for the N64 back then. This page in N64 Magazine, harking back to May '98, is all about Mission Impossible on the N64. Remember that one? It's doing a special investigation, they called it, and it's split into 2 parts. First up is Embassy. Apparently it's a complicated mission where you're Ethan Hunt, of course, having to dodge enemy agents whilst infiltrating the embassy's private bits that party guests like you and I wouldn't normally see. The level starts with a cutscene sweeping through the embassy, and they reckon Infogrames, the developers, hadn't added all the guests in just yet in this preview build. You're undercover, on the run from an assassin, and you need to chat to guests to get background info. There's mention of a smoke canister in the vent ducts for your escape. Dieter, another IMF agent, is working undercover at the bar. And a helpful tip, the woman in the red dress is your killer, so watch out for her. You've even got to get a bloke to the toilets, so you can knock him out. Sneaky stuff. Then it moves on to escape from the embassy. This is after you set up your escape by planting gas canisters in the vent ducts from the previous mission. Your assignment now is to get out without being detected. Dressing as a fireman apparently seems like a good shout. Smoke is billowing everywhere, guards look worried, and you need to hide in the elevator so Jack can find a way to get you out. Typical spy stuff. This bit looks like you need to call for the elevator. Alerting guards is game over, naturally. Chase him quickly before guards see you. Jack brings you a fireman's outfit so you can walk out undetected. It's all a bit tense, like you'd expect from Mission Impossible. Down the side, there's a bit about the Running Man, which sounds a bit daft to be honest. They're on about Dash Rendar from Shadows of the Empire, and his animated backside waddling around. Bit harsh maybe, but they were worried when they heard Mission Impossible was also going third person, thinking it might be a bit clunky like Shadows of the Empire. However, they're saying the character modeling is much better than LucasArts games, and Ethan Hunt's outfits change depending on the situation. He uses disguises and a face mask machine to get into places, but apparently no matter what he's wearing, he always looks and moves more fluently than Dash. So, swings and roundabouts then. This page looks at Mission Impossible on the N64. Right then, so they're calling this a special investigation. Bit dramatic in it. Anyway, they're showing off some storyboard sketches. Movie style they say, from the train level. Makes sense. The game itself has 9 missions, and this one, Sewage Farm, is set in Prague, with Ethan Hunt breaking into what's supposed to be an abandoned sewage works. Turns out, surprise surprise, there's KGB activity. Innocent establishment, yeah right. Apparently Candice is the computer expert you need to protect in this mission. Why gay? Then there's tunnel sabotage. Escaping the Subutan apparently is tricky through a long dark tunnel, but Ethan's got his night vision goggles, clever clogs, to help with his sabotage. Seems you're supposed to jump between lorries in this bit. They even give a helpful hint. Don't fire a gun, or you'll be swamped with guards. Yeah, cheers for that, very insightful. They reckon you'll need to punch guards if you run out of ammo. Charming. And plant explosives too. Anchor bolts are mentioned for blowing up the tunnel. Guns and stuff section just says Ethan's got a wide variety of weapons, showing off what looks like a use AI. Just like the old teleseries, they mention the music is from the original TV series, which is a nice touch for the opening sequence. Nothing massively groundbreaking here, but it's Mission Impossible on the N64, you know what you're getting. This page in N64 Magazine, bless it, is having a look at Mission Impossible on the N64. It's got 2 sections, one called GS, and another CIA Interrogation, both breaking down different bits of the game. GS sounds like a right sneaky mission in the embassy basement, where you're dressed as the ambassador's aide. The aim is to cause a bit of mayhem with some crates, find a key, and get out alive. Standard spy stuff really. They're showing a screenshot of Ethan Hunt, that's Tom Cruise in game form, getting past a guard by dressing up, quite clever, and another bit where he's presumably been gassed, not ideal. CIA Interrogation is about Ethan being framed and stuck at CIA headquarters in Langley. Looks like you start off in a bit of a pickle and need to escape the detention center. They show a few screenshots, one where Ethan is probably being interrogated, and another where he's making a run for it down a corridor. Apparently, the IMF, that's Ethan's team, have been kind enough to leave some gadgets to help him escape. How thoughtful. Down the side, there's a section titled, More Gadgets Than an Innovations Catalog. Bit cheeky that. It's showcasing some of the spy gear you get to play with. There's the communicator for chatting to your mates back at base, a gas injector for knocking out rooms full of people before you even walk in, very James Bond that, night vision glasses for seeing in the dark, naturally, and a detonator, because what's a spy game without something going boom? It says Sabotage is the name of the game, which is pretty much what you expect, isn't it? And if you haven't got a detonator in this game, then your bombs are going to be exploding. A bit dramatic there from the magazine, but I suppose it gets the point across. Overall, it's a preview of Mission Impossible, showcasing the stealth and gadgetry of the game, and hinting at the movie time vibe that was all the rage back then. Looks alright, might have been a decent rental, back in '98. This page from N64 Magazine, bless it, is having a look at Yoshi's story. There's a big picture of Yoshi right there, you can't miss him, looking all bright and colourful, with some gameplay screenshots in the background. The tagline says, Yelping, leaping and straining, Yoshi's Story arrives in the UK. And it's still utterly wonderful. Sounds like they're quite keen on it, bit over the top maybe. Utterly wonderful. We'll see about that. Then there's a section called Guide to Scoring. They're explaining their review scores, like a proper magazine should. Apparently because N64 games were so blinking expensive back then, they only give out their Star Game medal for games scoring 85% and above, which they reckon are genuinely worth buying. Anything 84% to 70% is considered jolly good fun, and worth adding to your collection, which is fair enough. Then it goes down from there. 69% to 50% is worth buying, but they hate giving games marks like this. Sounds like they're on the fence. Below that, 49% to 20% is for lazily programmed or hurriedly cobbled together games, and 19% to 0% is the disaster zone. Right then, quite a clear scale of judgment. Makes sense, I suppose. Let's see what score Yoshi's Story actually gets. Gotta flick over the page to find out. This page of N64 Magazine from back in '98 looks like we're diving into the import arena section, seeing what odd games are coming over from Japan and America. First up is Witrix. Water, water everywhere, they say. Sounds a bit like Tetris with water, and they're reviewing it. Then there's Quake 64, bragging about being massive on PC, but can it beat GoldenEye 007 on the N64? Bit of a bold claim there. Warren? Next is something called Susume. Tyson Puzzle Dama, described as Puyo Puyo Japanese style. Puzzle games were all the rage back then, weren't they? And Olympic hockey. Sounds straightforward enough, although they say sadly no subtle changes, just the Wayne Gretzky engine. Not exactly selling it, are they? Then there's a how it works bit explaining their review scores. They've got visuals to see if the N64 graphics are any good, sounds to judge the music and effects, mastery to see if you can actually control the game properly, lifespan because games were pricey back then at over 60 quid, and finally a verdict to sum it all up, trying to be all scientific about how fun the game is. And then there's Team 64 Inches with their usual nonsense, pretending to be celebrities giving their opinions on the games. Burt Reynolds, Ron Howard, Will Smith the Fresh Prince, Lou Diamond Phillips, and then Phil Collins, Brady Bunch Mum, James Woods and Dan Aykroyd. Bit of a random bunch if you ask me, but there you go. They've each got a Game of the Month pick, like Burt Reynolds picked Mission Impossible and Dan Aykroyd picked Quake 64. Always a bit of a laugh, even if you didn't quite get the joke sometimes. This page is from the N64 Arena section. Issue 15 looks like they're having another look at Yoshi's Story. They reckon they reviewed the Japanese version back in issue 12, which is classic magazine stuff, reviewing games before they even come out over here. Anyway, Yoshi's Story, it's all over the page with screenshots of that slightly odd-looking felt tip style world they've gone for. Looks like they're pointing out Mr. Kite, or Mr. Clown as they've called him, who apparently helps you reach higher levels. Right you are. And those green melon bubbles. Yeah, I vaguely remember those, filled with stuff in the challenge mode apparently. Then there's some tip about hitting those little bad guys with eggs to get coins, and watching out for water blobs. Water blobs, yeah, sounds thrilling, doesn't it? Still, Yoshi's Story, it was something a bit different on the N64 at the time, wasn't it? This page is an article about Yoshi's Story on the N64, and it's fair to say the magazine seems a bit puzzled by it all. They're calling it Nintendo's beautifully illustrated storybook, and say it's reached the UK. There's a little box out to the side that's got the game details. Nintendo, April release, 128 meg, 1 player, needs a controller pack and rumble pack, and costs £50. 50 quid. Madness really when you think about it now. The reviewer reckons it's a radical departure for Nintendo on the N64, being entirely 2D on a console built for 3D. They mention its divided opinions, some thinking it's too short, easy, basic, and others not so much. They hint that some critics have really slated it. It also says it's a departure from Yoshi's Island on the SNES, and Lilac Wars, which is a bit of an odd comparison. Apparently some think Yoshi's Story is streets ahead in invention and challenge-wise, while others, well, probably not. There's a bit in a box called Bag O' White and Black, which talks about beating the game with a black or white Yoshi, and then you can play as those colors from the start on a new game. Also, look out for White Shy Guys, as they let you reclaim dead Yoshi's Charming. There's a tip about moving the camera angle in the page screen, and bashing into fruit bubbles, especially when you've got no eggs left. Handy, that, Wariku. There are a few screenshots. One shows a level called P.3 Summit, the tall tower, with a big smiling pink heart thing in the background, and text saying, "The page turned, and the Yoshis grew happier." Another shows some gameplay with Yoshi in a bubble, collecting fruit and bits and bobs, and there's a little bit of text saying Yoshi needs training ability to avoid bullets, which sounds a bit more exciting than the rest of it. D'accord. Overall, it sounds like they're not completely sold on Yoshi's story, a bit like it's a bit too kiddie or something for the N64. But hey, maybe it's got its charms. We'll see, won't we? This page from N64 Magazine, issue 15, takes us right back to Yoshi's story on the N64, eh? Remember that one? Jurassic Path it's called, and it's giving us a guide to some of the secrets and tricks in the game. Juxer. First up, page 1, rail lift apparently. To get a secret heart early on, just after the first bit of the level you need to spot a bubble with a surprise circle in it. Use Yoshi's tongue to get on it, and then you'll see a question mark bubble. Shoot at it, a switch will fall down, and you need to give that a ground pound. Then, surprise circles will pop up in the sky. Flip about like a good egg to reach the top clouds and you'll find another switch. Press it, and hey presto, a secret heart appears. Only 3 more to go, apparently. Sounds like a bit of a faff for 1 heart, but back then we were suckers for secrets, weren't we? Next, page 2, Bone Dragon Pit. This one's about defeating the 3-headed dragon boss. Not exactly taxing this advice, it just says bottom bounce each head twice, be careful of the fireballs, and don't get tangled up with the body. Groundbreaking stuff, eh? Apparently once it's done, you get a gorgeous, shiny new heart. Right you are, Roking. And then there's a PLS, find the Black Yoshis on page 2 section. Black Yoshi number 1 is in level 2. Near a Miss Warp tulip, break off using B, fire at a sphere, and a Black Yoshi egg appears. Black Yoshi number 2 is in level 4. Get to the first room with ghost snakes, jump to the top, fire at a question mark bubble, and a Black Yoshi egg will fall down. Apparently these Black Yoshis can eat anything, even those Shy Guys carrying weights. Useful I suppose if you were struggling with the weightlifting Shy Guys. Finally, at the bottom there's a When Dinosaurs Ruled the Mirth bit, talking about things you find in Yoshi's story. Egg boxes are mentioned, you know, the green spotted ones from Yoshi's Island. Apparently you can get eggs from them by jumping underneath, and you can use the Z trigger and crosshair to aim and shoot the eggs. Surprise circles are mentioned too, saying they are useful for getting to high places. And Shy Guys, they come in all colors and carry fruit, and you can eat them for extra eggs, or bounce near them to change their color and get extra points. Yoshi! A little reminder of the basics then, in case you'd forgotten while hunting for secret hearts and Black Yoshis. Pretty standard stuff for a tips page from back in the day. This page of N64 Arena in the magazine is all about Yoshi's story, remember that one? It was alright I suppose, a bit different. Woo-coo-coo-coo. So first off, on page 3, Cloud Cruising, they're telling you how to defeat Cloud N Candy. Apparently it's easier than it looks, this big cloud fella. They reckon you just gotta jump and lick him when he's on the ground level after he's been doing his bouncing about on platforms. Seems you need to do this about 10 times to see him off. Warrington Northtra. Then there's a bit called P Kill Us. Find the White Yoshis and White Shy Guy on page 3. Right then, so they say there's a White Shy Guy hiding at the start of the level, in a little bubble, just before the first leaf bit on screen. You need to use a tulip to get up there. For White Yoshi number 1, you need to go through level 3, down a drain pipe, and follow some pipes until you get to a red pipe, where Poochie is yapping whatever that means. Go down that red pipe, and you'll find a White Yoshi egg in a bubble. White Yoshi number 2 is apparently on level 2, near Miss Warp. Keep going left until you find a bubble, fire an egg at it, and grab the White Yoshi egg. They also remind you that White Yoshis can chomp on all Shy Guys, just like the Black Yoshi. Good to know, eh? Hordes. Flipping over to page 4 Jungle Hut, it's all about collecting melons. All 30 of them. Apparently you need to search properly to find them all. They give a few tips like all the jungle huts have at least 1 green melon, sometimes more. Use tulips to jump to leap from side to side and collect coins to get to the melons. Some melons are just floating about in mid-air, and some Shy Guys are flying about, firing at you, but they also drop melons when they get hit so you could get melons that way. They mention searching the drain pipes at the bottom and top of the arena, because the huts are supposedly full of melons. Then there's a bit about a traditional platforming section with a question mark switch at the top. Hit that for a melon fest apparently. And they finish by saying use your sniff ability throughout the level, as there are a couple of melons hidden out of sight. Sounds like a bit of a melon hunt really, doesn't it? They even say, it's not easy getting hold of all 30 melons, but that's a good thing, no? Cheeky sods. Then there's a little section at the bottom explaining some of the bits and bobs in the game. Info boxes are from the old NES Mario days. These blocky faces give you clues, but they're not always easy to understand. They're usually near bosses or secret areas, and can be used to get higher up somehow. Coins are just your normal coins, platforming points, and in the Yoshi world they have smiley faces on them. Each one is worth a point, and you should use your nose sniff to find groups of them. Miss Warps, or Missy as they call her, is like a restart point or a warp between areas. She's about 4 times per level, and you restart from the last one you woke up by jumping on her head. Lastly, magic vases are hidden vases that are easy enough to find. Jump on them, and push down on the analog stick to use them. They take you between different parts of levels or sometimes to subgames. Right, got all that? Seems like a lot of melon-related faffing about to me. This page then takes us into the world of Yoshi's story. Right at the top it's got a how-to guide, this time for reaching the secret melon contest. They're calling it Shy Guy Limbo. Looking at the screenshots, it's all very colourful and woolly. Very Yoshi. They are telling you to ride the clouds upwards to get to a pipe. Looks like you need to dodge Lakitu and his spiky balls while you're at it. Apparently, you're after 30 melons to properly notch up your score. It's all about making sure you've avoided those pesky spiky balls from Lakitu, otherwise you'll get killed off. Sounds about right for Yoshi's story. Bit of a change of pace from Mario 64, wasn't it? Or into Norse. Then underneath we've got another how-to, this time for defeating Baby Bowser in Lift Castle. This one reckons it's reaching the end of the game, although they hedge their bets by saying it's not quite Mario 64, is it? Were. Bit cheeky that. Anyway, they are describing Baby Bowser as a rubbish poem teller, which is a bit harsh. The advice is about using the tree full of goodies, getting hearts, and knowing Baby Bowser throws fruit and bombs. They mention getting eggs on him, and how many hits it takes depending on your Yoshi color. Apparently black or white Yoshi makes things easier. Tasty indeed, as they say. Warink. Down at the bottom it's got little descriptions of in-game items like hearts, daisies, tulips, and lucky fruits. Hearts come in big and small, daisies are good for energy, tulips can be turned into throwable EGG ball things, and lucky fruits are chosen at the start of the game and give you bonus points. Standard sort of stuff you'd expect in a guide at the time, keeping you clued in on all the little bits and bobs. This page in N64 Magazine, back in '98, it's having a look at Yoshi's story. Right from the start they are laying it on thick, saying it's a bit of a letdown if Nintendo doesn't knock it out the park, you know? They reckon Yoshi's story has had a rough time of it since its Japanese release, and they're calling it Nintendo's first N64 failure. Bit harsh maybe? The main issue apparently is the length, saying you could blast through it in under an hour if you just grabbed fruit on each level. 50 quid for an hour of gameplay? Criminal, they say, especially from the Kyoto lot who are usually spot on. Then they mention the design, calling it old school, and comparing it to post-16-bit games, which, well yeah, it is a bit like that. See Toryu. They're saying it's all been done before, the platforms, the enemies, coin collecting, even those dodgy leaps of faith, and they're definitely not hyped about it being like Super Mario World or Yoshi's Island on the SNES, which were bursting with new ideas apparently. According to the reviewer, Yoshi's story has none of that. It's all a bit predictable and you just sort of wander through expecting something amazing but it doesn't quite happen. But they do say it gets better if you try to collect all 30 melons on each level, making it properly tricky. Apparently that's the real challenge, hunting for those melons to unlock new levels. They reckon it works well enough though, and complements the level design. It seems you're supposed to search every nook and cranny, and use every bit of Yoshi's inventory. They suggest playing it a few times to get the most out of it, and you might even enjoy it more the second or third time round. They conclude that it's not going to revolutionize gaming or anything, and if you're expecting SNES graphics you'll be excited. Some might hate it apparently, but appreciate the art style and fun. They've got these little snippets about enemies, like Pachyderm on the first level, and switches you can find in Bubbles, and Poochie the dog who helps you find secrets, saying he's particularly useful. There are some screenshots showing the game, the sort of colourful storybook style it's got, with Yoshi and enemies. Down the side, they've got a little never look back box about continuing the game if you die. Apparently you just reset the console. They are a bit sarcastic about it being obvious. They've given it scores in categories. 8 for visuals saying it's beautiful 2D, 9 for sounds saying the music is amazing, 7 for mastery saying it plays like a dream and shows off the N64 in 2D, and 8 for lifespan. Lifespan comments says it's not ideal as a main game, but the melon hunting is good. Overall verdict is 86%, saying it's not exactly what they expected or a classic, but it's still playable and lovingly crafted. So a bit of a mixed bag then, but still a decent score. This page then, it's all about wet tricks, isn't it? Yeah, wet tricks on the N64, remember that one? Water everywhere, and not a drop to drink they've got there, which is a bit of a clever way to sum it up really. So this is a how to play guide, bless 'em. Starts off telling you to build a lake in Witrix, which is the whole point in it. You get these uppers falling down to raise the landscape, and you're trying to trap the water. Then it's on to complete your wall, telling you to build a good barrier to stop the water escaping. They mention little flashing arrows telling you where water is leaking, which is actually quite helpful to remember. Then, bombs away is about using bombs to blast holes, bit of a double-edged sword that could mess things up just as easily. And finally, what a downer, which is about those green blocks that lower the land. Downers naturally, which they say are actually helpful for earthquakes and making deep lakes. Right you are, mate. Down the bottom there's a bit of a review or something. Says it's unforgiving and abrupt, which yeah, spot on. Classic mode, game over in seconds if you're rubbish. You can do better than that, it probably tells you. Git. They say switch to the D-pad, probably good advice back then with those clunky analog sticks sometimes. And they reckon getting a ducky is a moment of joy. Well, each to their own, but I suppose it was something back then. Tutorial mode is helpful, they say. It was alright, I guess. Puzzle games can be hellishly addictive. Well, they weren't wrong about that, were they? Weetrix was a bit of a head-scratcher sometimes. Des O'Connor on the telly. Turn it off. Huh. Bit of a dated joke now, innit? £40 quid for Wetrix back then? Blimey. Games were pricey. 64 meg cart. 12 players. Rumble pack compatible. Cartridge backup. Controller pack. All the jargon we used to care about. Yeah, Wetrix. Bit of alright puzzle game for the N64, kept you busy for a bit. This page is all about Wetrix on the N64, a puzzle game, and it's a review from, well, back in the day, May 98. They're giving it a good going over, breaking it down into sections. Right at the top, section 5, is Ooh, Ducky, talking about making deep lakes to get little yellow ducks on screen. Sounds a bit daft, doesn't it? Then there's red and yellow and pink and green, which is about rainbows popping up in the game, and being a multiplier for your score, a bit psychedelic. Number 7 is fire and ice, and that's about fireballs and ice falling in the game to mess with your water level. Sounds like they're throwing everything at you in this game. There's a bit called modes in the hole, which is about different ways to play Wetrix, like harder modes with uppers and downers, which sounds like trouble. Then they get on to the proper review bits, visuals, saying it's alright, functional, not amazing but some nice effects. Sounds are apparently beats, whistles and pops, which doesn't sound too sophisticated, and they reckon the music gets irritating after a bit. Mastery section says it could be on other consoles but wouldn't look as good. Lifespan reckons it'll annoy you forever, so it must be addictive, in a bad way maybe. Finally, Verdict gives it 78%, saying it's good but could do with more pizzazz and novel features. So, overall, Wetrix sounds like a decent enough puzzle game to keep you occupied if you were bored of Tetris back then, but maybe not a classic that everyone remembers. They mention it being tricky and unforgiving, saying it's not kind and loving, which is a bit dramatic for a puzzle game, innit? They compare it to Tetris quite a bit and say it's better than Tetrisphere, and the reviewer, James, even name drops Duke Nukem 64 for some reason. Bit of a weird review really, but there you go. The next page in N64 Magazine is all about Quake 64. They start off with a quick reminder about grenade jumping, which was a bit of a dark art, even more so than rocket jumping apparently. Then it dives into Quake 64, calling it an aged PC conversion. A bit blunt, but not entirely wrong, was it? GoldenEye beta is a question they pose. Cheeky sods. They're saying it's already budget priced, even for the N64, chatting about Saturn and PlayStation versions too, and whispering about Quake 2 on the PlayStation. Got some screenshots, the nailgun looks alright, and is that a shambler causing trouble? The captions are just a bit of added flavor. The Quake 64 box gives you the lowdown. April release, 64 megs, controller and rumble pack, 1 or 2 player, and a wallet busting £60. 60 quid, you know how it was. Issue 15 of N64 Magazine, page 52, if you're keeping score. This page in N64 Magazine is all about deathmatch in Quake 64, aimed at kids even. Bit cheeky in it. They're showcasing the 6 specifically designed deathmatch levels for the game, saying they are one of its best features. Seems a bit much, but alright. It's broken down into maps, labeled 1 to 4 here. Map 1, they reckon grenade launcher is the best weapon, telling you to grab it quick. The best technique is about getting the grenade launcher first, and then using a switch to get the yellow armor. They're telling you to watch out for the 100 health box on a platform, and how to get to it, saying it's possibly the least interesting deathmatch level, bit harsh. Map 2 is all about rocket launcher. The best technique is about using a slipgate and moving platform to get the high vantage point, and then double back for the rocket launcher. They're saying to watch out for the steps in the main room that set off lava traps, if your opponent is there. Sounds a bit nasty that. They call it a favorite, and good for PC gamers but maybe too big for 101. Map 3, again rocket launcher is the best weapon. The technique is about getting the rocket launcher and occupying the area. They mention using stairs and exits, and getting quad damage and protection of pentagram. Watch out for the pentagram of protection, which can be reached through a tunnel from upstairs. They say it's a bit too big for comfort, so maybe it's a bit sprawling. Shamekem. Map 4 is Thunderbolt time. Best technique is jump across to the quad damage platform, and then drop to the platform below, avoiding the lava, naturally, to get the rocket launcher. Watch out for lava deaths, apparently too easy to fall in. They reckon DM4 is the best level and perfect for 2-player bouts. Saying analog stick users will be better, which makes sense for aiming. They are saying using the D-PAD is basically suicide. Bit dramatic. Door. Over on the right, there's a Quake terminology box explaining what a frag and gib is. Bit gory for a kid's mag, isn't it? Also explaining camping, and telefrag, and even pineapple for a grenade. Blimey, all sorts of made UP words for killing each other. They are saying these can be combined for maximum effect, and give an example using asterisks for rude words like camping gib. Bit silly really. Easy when you know how, apparently. Right you are. This page is about getting the hang of rocket jumping in Quake 64. They've called the article Rocket Man. It starts off with a bit of a laugh about the A-Team and how they always seem to survive explosions, and then gets into how you can do rocket jumps in the game by firing a rocket at your feet. Bit daft really, but it gets you to places you normally can't reach. Then there's a bit in the corner about gibbing, which is when you blow monsters to bits. Apparently, each monster has a stamina rating, and if you hit them hard enough, they turn into GIBs, which is always good fun in a gruesome kind of way. There's a table listing all the monsters like dogs, grunts, zombies, knights, enforcers, scrags, spawns, ogres, dark knights, fiends, voras and shamblers, and how many hits and points for a gib. Some can only be properly killed with explosives, mind you. The next bit is called Play with Deathmatches Kids, and it's got tips for deathmatching on different maps in Quake 64. First up is Map 5. They reckon the rocket launcher is the best weapon, obviously, and to grab the thunderbolt and pentagram of protection in the pool at the start. They say if you're clever, you can wait for someone to use the switch in a room to open a door to get a health box and then nick it. Sounds a bit cheeky. Map 6 is also rocket launcher territory apparently. The idea is to grab it, and the red armor from a platform, and camp there, as you can see all the entrances. Bit cheap if you ask me, camping. They also mention a floor panel that leads to a thunderbolt, ammo and ring of shadows, but it teleports you back, so watch out for ambushes. Map 7 again, rocket launcher is the weapon of choice. This one is about just running around like a madman and shooting everything. They mention wind tunnels that propel you around, and to watch out for people using them as they are easy targets for grenades. All good fun for a bit of mindless blasting with your mates, I suppose. Quake 64 was alright for its time, wasn't it? This page in N64 Magazine back in '98 takes a look at some of the pickups in Quake 64. It's all about the bits and bobs you grab in the game to keep you going, not just the weapons mind you, but the other bits. Gaki. First up is health. Obvious really, the red crosses. They say if you're nearly full health, don't bother, save it for later. Which is fair enough, waste not want not, eh, miss? Then there's quad damage. That little symbol of power. Apparently it makes you do 4 times the damage. They're calling it one of the greatest collectibles ever. Bit strong maybe, but quad damage is always good fun, isn't it? Messy deaths and all that. Pentagram of protection is next. Makes you invincible for a bit. They reckon it's rare, but dead useful. Especially for firing the thunderbolt underwater. Underwater combat in Quake? Blimey, things you forget. Ring of shadows. Makes you invisible for a bit. Good for sneaking past monsters apparently. But if you start blasting away, they'll see you anyway. Could be handy in multiplayer maybe if you were a sneaky type. Dick. Make you. Armor is covered too, blue, red and yellow. Blue is 100 points, red 150, and yellow 200. Armor's always essential in Quake, especially as you get further in and everything's trying to kill you constantly. Lastly, 100 health boxes. These are the big ones, hidden away, but boost your health way over 100, temporarily. Good for a bit of extra staying power, but it drains back down to 100 eventually. There's also a bit in a box on the side, complaining about the building pause every time a level loads. 5 seconds it takes. 5 seconds. Can you imagine waiting 5 whole seconds for a level to load these days? They reckon it's because they had to really compress the game to fit it on the cartridge, and it's decompressing as it loads. Principle of the thing more than a genuine annoyance, they reckon. Probably right. Still, Quake 64 on the N64. Good times. This page in the magazine ARGH. Artillery. It's all about the weaponry in Quake 64 on the Nintendo 64. Right then, they're running through the game's arsenal, starting with the axe, which they reckon is about as useful as a chocolate teapot, mainly for humiliating your mates in deathmatches. Then it's onto the shotgun, good for sniping apparently, but not much cop against the bigger beasties. The double-barreled shotgun is in there, for close encounters and dealing with groups of grunts. Next is the nail gun, a rapid-fire number that freezes opponents. The perforator is up, described as the next step up from the nail gun, even more lethal if you've got the quad damage power-up. Grenade launcher gets a mention, bouncy pineapples they call them, not for close range mind you, and of course, the rocket launcher, the weapon of choice for Quake 64, explosions and all, though awkward at medium range. Lastly, there's the Thunderbolt, a lightning gun, good near water, apparently bolts can pass through multiple enemies. The review itself touches on the game, being a European release of the original Quake, finally making its way to the N64. They mention the single-player mode being a bit controversial back in the day, some loved the atmosphere, others found it repetitive. Then there's the multiplayer, deathmatch sessions being the main draw for Quake at the time. They point out a flawed two-player compromise, and that Quake 64 relies on its single-player charm. They compare it to Turok, but mostly indoors and darker, and even cheekily suggest GoldenEye might cross your mind. Graphically, they reckon it's a decent copy of the PC version's architecture, but with some simplifications, perhaps unnecessary ones. They poke fun at the color palette, all browns and muddy colors, comparing it to school discos in brown chords. Bit harsh, but you get the picture. They do admit some levels are better than others, but overall it's a bit samey corridor-wise. The reviewer is not overly impressed with the brownness of it all, basically saying it's not a looker. The next page here is a review of Quake 64, from back in '98 when the N64 was king, or at least trying to be. Visually, they reckon it's average and functional, nothing too special. Which, to be fair, was probably true even then, compared to what folks were seeing on PC. Sound-wise, the music and background sounds are apparently poor, but the quad noise is fab, whatever that means, probably referring to the Rumble Pack. Mastery is marked down because it's been done before on other formats, and GoldenEye apparently did it better on the N64, which is a fair point. GoldenEye was a tough act to follow. Lifespan they give a 7, saying the death matches will keep players interested, but the single play is quite tough. The verdict is a bit harsh, calling it a disappointment, saying it's only a little more than a straight port of the PC original, and they hoped for more. They've given it a 79% overall. The reviewer, James Price, reckons it's enjoyable, in a mindless kind of way, unlike GoldenEye. He talks about the level design being a bit like a Lego castle, and compares the rocky cliffs to Turok, and corridors to GoldenEye. Mentions zombies, knights, fiends and ogres as enemies, and the Shambler, grunts and Rottweilers. He also throws in Duke Nukem, Doom, and Premier League for some reason, probably to make a point about game quality or something. Sounds like they were a bit underwhelmed but still found some fun in it, which is probably about right for Quake 64 on the N64 in '98. This page in N64 Magazine seems to be diving into a new beat-em-up called GASP, Fighters in Extreme. Right at the top, it's flagged as an import, which was quite the thing back then, wasn't it? The review is part of the Import Arena section, telling you right away these games are from Japan and America, but because the N64 was region-free, we got to see them early. The big question they're posing is whether GASP can challenge Tekken, or if it's just got a silly name. They're setting the scene by saying the N64 isn't exactly overflowing with top-tier fighting games, mentioning Fighters Destiny and Mace as already out. They're being a bit cheeky about the damage in some games, like Mortal Kombat Trilogy and War Gods, and they're really hoping for a proper quality fighter from the likes of Namco or Capcom, which was always the dream. They wonder if Konami's made a good job of making the N64 a serious fighting machine. They're clearly comparing GASP to Virtua Fighter, and even jokingly Sub-Zero and Shiva, which is a bit of a dig, and then throwing in Konami's pedigree from ISS-64 and Mystical Ninja, which is a bit of a mixed bag, in it. There are a few screenshots, one with characters called Mickey and Rin who apparently keep splitting up, another with a chap named Sakai Yuma being a gentleman warrior, who's apparently calling for an ambulance for his opponent Kai. Then there's Kai getting a jab in, and finally Serena showing off some blue lightning effects. Sounds a bit melodramatic, doesn't it? Tai. In the info box for GASP Fighters NE Extreme, it says it's by Konami, out in Japan in May, and coming to the US later, with a massive 64 meg cart. It mentions it uses a Rumble Pack, which was always a decent addition back then, and it's 1 or 2 players. They reckon it's around 35 quid at 6,900 yen, which was a fair bit of pocket money back then. So yeah, looks like they are properly having a look at this import fighter, and wondering if it's going to be any good. This page is all about NE Extreme, or GASP, Fighters N64 as it seems to be called. They're talking about the tag team mode, saying it's a bit different. You fight through the usual single player stuff, but then meet someone who wants to join you. And a good thrashing will convince them apparently. They mention some Japanese text popping up when your character is getting battered too much, and you can tag out, but if you play by Queensberry rules, well, you're in trouble. Then it's on to the characters. A right bunch they are. There's Himuro Kai, the typical all-rounder, like Ryu they say, a bit bland, functional. Yaigashi Kaoru, who they reckon nobody over 10 will pick, bit of a weird description, something about dancing on fallen foes and marshmallows, odd. Kiryuin Miki, tall and elegant, likes taunting, not the strongest but can annoy parents apparently, with bouncing bits on the player select screen, right then. And Hayu Serena, who apparently kills all known opponents dead, easy to get to grips with, and uses kitchen punches. Sounds like a right laugh, other than Domestos they say, whatever that means. Then they go on to some other characters. Jimmy, badly drawn apparently, signature looks rough, K9 howling, beat 'em up kitchen, jar of mold, charming, killer Congo, standard slow but powerful type, Tabasco spices, headbutt move, the spiciest of characters. Sakai Yuma, lives near Mount Fuji, kicks bottoms, chicken vindaloo, lovely. And Agami Carol Rin, Japanese schoolgirl, martial arts expert. Squeaky noises, lack of weight, collapse under pressure, alright for some I suppose, la BA. Finally, there's a bit on the bosses. Apparently there's two types, the usual big sumo bloke, and then a second boss who changes into a statue or a werewolf if you annoy him. Kept them worried for a good 20 minutes, blimey. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 15, looks like it's diving into the world of import games, specifically focusing on a beat-em-up called GASP, Fighters N64 on the N64. It kicks off with a bit of a lukewarm reception, suggesting it's perhaps not quite living up to the hype it received through those early internet rumors, you know, the Chinese whispers type. The reviewer seems a bit cynical, hinting it's more of a Tekken or Street Fighter wannabe, boiling down to button-mashing memory tests rather than something truly innovative. They do highlight the character creation mode as a bit of a novelty, letting you mess about with faces, hairstyles and clothing, even tweaking your character's size. It sounds like a bit of fun for a while, creating your own bizarre fighter, but they reckon the novelty wears off pretty quickly. There are a couple of screenshots from the game itself. One shows some sort of beefy red chap called Congo clobbering Bobby in what looks like a city back alley or something. Another screenshot shows Kate and Kaoru duking it out in a boxing ring-like setting. There's a caption next to the Bobby screenshot that's a bit dark humor, talking about Bobby from King of the Hill and a campervan prank gone wrong, suggesting he's met an unfortunate end in the game. Then there's a snippet about Kate Moss being a confident fighter, and Kaoru finding he can teach her about peanut butter and jelly sarnies, which is a bit of a weird comment, even for the time. Overall, it sounds like GASP, Fighters N64 is a bit of a letdown, fun for a short while with its character creator, but ultimately a bit shallow and forgettable. Probably best to stick to Virtua Fighter or something similar, eh? This page then features a review of GASP, Fighters N64 on the N64, calling it Import Arena. Looking at the screenshots, it's a 3D fighter, a bit like Tekken or Virtua Fighter, but maybe not quite as slick. They've got screenshots of characters like Yuma, Serena, Kai, and Congo. The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed, to be honest. They mention the fighters are weedy and uninspired, and the animation is utterly unremarkable. Ouch. There's talk about special moves being a bit rubbish, like Jimmy the Zombie apparently giving a pathetic slap as a special move. They also describe Serena and Miki arguing about which pocket monster is cutest, Pikachu or Mewtwo, which sounds a bit daft. The reviewer does mention some redeeming features, like interactive backgrounds, where you can knock opponents through walls, and sidestepping behind scenery. They've broken down the review into categories, which is quite helpful. For visuals, they give it a 6, saying the backgrounds are nicely lit but the animation is lightweight, and they mention Jimmy again, not in a good way. Sounds gets a 5, music is okay, but sound effects don't fit the action. Mastery also gets a 5, just for the lighting effects apparently. Lifespan is a miserable 2, suggesting it won't last you more than a week. The overall verdict is blunt, saying even with limited competition, GASP is at the bottom of the N64 fighter pile, giving it a lowly 52%. Doesn't sound like a must-buy then, even back in '98, when we were probably desperate for any new fighting game on the N64. The next page here is all about Susume, Taisen Puzzle Dharma. Sounds a bit Japanese, doesn't it? Turns out it's another one of those Puyo Puyo style puzzle games, you know the type. Blobs of color you gotta match up. Apparently this one's from Konami, on the N64. They're saying it's a bit tricky to get into, finding the bowling game was a right faff apparently. Visually it's alright, inspirational on the scenes they reckon. Bit of a weird comparison considering it's on the N64, but there you go. Sounds are a bit mad too, sampled speech, even some swearing in English they say, and crazy tunes. Mastery is a no-go according to them, so maybe it's a bit button mashy, but lifespan is a big thumbs up, so it must be addictive. These puzzle games usually are, to be fair. Boring to know. Looking at the screenshots, the characters are a bit bonkers, aren't they? One looks like a right dodgy geezer, and the pink alien thing is just odd. They even point out how weird they are in the little captions. One of them says the lady swears when she loses. Lucky if you've got sensitive ears then apparently. Verdict is 78%, they call it a rattling good puzzler with a few new bits added. But then they moan about the price, 35 quid. Bit steep for Puyo, isn't it? They say it's always been a good laugh though, these games. Tim Weaver wrote the review. Must have been a fun one to play in the office, probably shouting at each other when someone got a big chain reaction. Yeah, looks like a decent import title, if you were into that sort of thing back then. This page in N64 Magazine takes a look at Olympic Hockey Nagano, 98, for the Nintendo 64. It seems like Midway thought they could just dust off their old Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey game and slap an Olympic sticker on it for a quick cash-in. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, isn't exactly blown away, giving it a mediocre 60%. They're pointing out it's got dated visuals compared to other hockey games of the time, and the sound is a bit naff with weedy FX and repetitive commentary, not to mention the national anthems sounding like they're played on a stylophone. Apparently the controls are alright, but nothing new, and the lack of any real depth means you probably won't be playing it for long. There's a bit about being able to make players defect to different teams, which is a bit of a strange feature. The screenshots show the rather chunky looking players on the ice, and the commentary snippets highlighted are a bit sarcastic, with lines about players needing to lose weight and unimpressed observations on the lack of ice reflections. The reviewer is clearly not convinced this is a must-buy, suggesting it's a bit cynical of Midway to just rehash an old game with minimal effort. It sounds like they expected a bit more, especially as Gretzky's 3D hockey was already out there. This page, then, is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at what they're calling the gaming underground, in the electronic jungle no less, written by a Martin Kitts. It's a bit of a humorous guide to surviving encounters with certain types of gamers. The main bit is a profile on someone they've labelled as hormonally confused. It's a slightly stereotypical picture of a teenage lad, a bit of a virgin, stressed about his GCSEs. Apparently he's into bands like Placebo and Marilyn Manson, and has even dabbled with makeup, black nail varnish and mascara, apparently. Poor lad sounds like he's struggling to get out of the bathroom in the morning. Gaming style is described as frantic. Apparently he likes games where he can play as large-breasted, scantily clad female characters, and he's got a massive software collection. Doesn't like girls, because they can be cruel apparently. Bedroom is plastered with Street Fighter characters and posters of Brian Molko from Placebo. Prospects apparently are that his gaming obsession will fade as his acne clears up, but he'll have fond memories of playing as Chun-Li, and apparently, he's destined for the Conservative Party. Bit harsh. Least likely to say is something critical about the portrayal of women in video games, and most likely to say is something about hoping for good programmers on the conversion of Dead or Alive. So it's a bit of a swipe at a certain type of gamer, bit cheeky, very 90s magazine humor. Probably wouldn't get away with it now, but it's a bit of a laugh looking back. Street Fighter and Dead or Alive, yeah, big games back then, especially Chun-Li. Those were the days. This page is having a bit of a laugh with profiles of different types of gamers you might find huddled over their N64s back in the day. First up is the latent sociopath type, a quiet and moody sort in a Metallica t-shirt apparently. Gaming style is gratuitously violent, which yeah, checks out for some of the games we were playing. They're into popping caps in games like GoldenEye, painting the walls red in Turok, and just generally killing things. Dislikes? Gun control and people in general, charming. Apparently you might find them making scrapbooks of serial killers, bit dark. And by day they're working at Quick Save, which is a supermarket if you didn't know. Apparently their neighbors can relax until Prozac gets banned, or Quick Save goes bust, whatever that means. Least likely to suggest Mario Kart 4 player, unsurprisingly. Most likely to say something about Tesco vouchers, and not being responsible for the consequences, which is a bit cryptic and edgy for the sake of it. Then there's the Game Kid profile, described as a small kid, gender not specified, who somehow convinced their parents the N64 was educational because of Pilot Wings. They apparently blitzed through Mario 64 in no time, and are too good for two-player games apparently. Gaming style is described as using the analog stick with their hands, and somehow playing two-joystick GoldenEye with their feet, which sounds like nonsense, but maybe it's a joke about being really skilled. Likes are pretty standard kid stuff. Jelly, balloons, Mr. Blobby Kids telly at the time, and beating their older brother at games. Dislikes are bath night and school, again, standard kid stuff. You might find them swapping games in the playground or hogging the family telly, naturally. Prospects are apparently fighter pilot or a nervous wreck, and they'll be known for hacking into the lottery system and printing boy's own suck on tickets. Least likely to suggest going outside to play. Most likely to ask their dad for a PC. And apparently they will probably accidentally start World War II, which is a bit of a random and silly ending. So yeah, bit of light-hearted fun poking at gamer stereotypes from back then. This page features a bit of a laugh, looking at stereotypical gamers. On the left we've got the ninja homeboy, seems to be your typical arcade dweller back in the day. Raider's beanie, hanging around arcades even when they are shut, thinks he's a Tekken 3 god. Apparently he's all about button mashing on beat-em-ups, thinks that's proper skill. Like showing off typing his PIN number on the cash point, bit of a weird flex that. Fancies Killer Instinct Gold, classic N64 brawler. Hates analog sticks, which is fair enough, they were a bit rubbish at first, weren't they? Likely to get repetitive strain injury, probably right, all that button mashing, and apparently he's the sort to ask to load up ISS64 to put in the big head's cheat, which is a deep cut if you remember that old cheat code magazine. Warrington Norsa has him, mate. Then on the right, we've got the enlightened master. This bloke is the opposite, fancies himself a bit of a guru, into all things Japanese, obsessed with Oriental culture, bit of a mail-order catalogue warrior. Apparently dislocated his hip doing the lotus position, sounds about right. He's into contemplative gaming, whatever that means. Likes Japanese RPGs with loads of text, puzzle games, and for some reason, whaling. Bit odd that. Dislikes anything English and wide open spaces, bit claustrophobic then. Lives in a posh detached house, but has turned his box room into a Japanese den with paper screens and a karaoke machine. Probably a bit naff really. Apparently he's gonna sell up and move to Japan, run out of cash, and come crawling back. Most likely to say sayonara, foolish westerners and all that nonsense, then a few days later asking if anyone speaks English because sewer goblins stole his clothes. Bit of a weirdo, both of them really. This page then is all about Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, which they're saying is the first proper RPG on the N64 for us, PAL chaps, which is something I suppose. They're banging on about how great it looks, all stonking visuals and massive imagination. Fair enough, it does look quite colourful in that picture of Goemon there with his pipe. Apparently medieval Japan is in a bit of trouble with peach spaceships and theatre-obsessed aliens of all things. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? This is part 1 of a walkthrough they're doing for the whole game, so if you were stuck you could follow along with this, I guess. Seems like they reckon Konami have done a good job with this one, and it's a bit of a treat. The next page here is a guide for Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64. Seems like they're calling it Mystical Ninja here. It's taking you through Oedo Town, Mount Fuji, and Oedo Castle. Right, so it's telling you to go to Goemon's house, turn left, follow the path, and you'll find a fortune doll. Always handy, fortune dolls. Then it's on to Mount Fuji, cross a bridge, get another fortune doll, and get yourself the chain pipe from some bloke in a hut called Mokubei. Chain pipe, yeah, you use that for shooting across gaps apparently. Firewuwa. Then it moves on to Udo Castle, telling you to smash pots for coins, find a key in a locked room after beating some enemies, and fight Mr. Elephant. Haha, they say. Bit childish, aren't we, to get a map? Apparently you don't really need the map if you're paying attention. There's talk about water-filled rooms and presses you need to hop onto. Seems like typical platforming stuff. Get keys, beat enemies, collect bits and bobs. They reckon baddies outside towns are good for money and kebabs, which sounds about right for a bit of Goemon. Good old Konami, eh? Mystical Ninja, it was a bit of a looker on the N64 back then, wasn't it? Fair play. This page of N64 Magazine, issue 15, looks like it's giving us some handy hints on how to get through a couple of games. First up is King Robot Congo from Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. It seems like a bit of a puzzle boss. You've got to hit him in the chin and dodge his fire breath, classic stuff. They mention using the chain pipe weapon and getting the miracle moon, which sounds important. It talks about backtracking and swimming through tunnels, typical game padding of the time, eh? Then there's a section on Goemon Impact, which is more robot action it seems. This bit's called Goemon Impact, and it's all about smashing everything in your path with this giant robot on roller skates. They mention jumping over bridges and buildings, looks like a bit of a button masher. Ooh. Finally, we've got Wartime Kabuki Robot Kashiwagi, another boss from Mystical Ninja. This one sounds a bit trickier, with energy limits and hologram twins. They are recommending using the chain arm and shooting doodlebug rockets, charmingly named. Apparently, simple punches are enough to deal with the holograms, which is good to know. They also mention punching missiles and umbrellas for extra medals, which is a bit odd, but bonus points are always welcome. All in all, standard stuff for a tips page back then, just the kind of pointers you'd need if you were stuck on Goemon. This page delves into the mystical world of Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64. It's a walkthrough, see, for Town and the Koryuta Dragon bit. Apparently, as soon as you stroll into Town, you're greeted by Yae, who's up for joining your party it seems. Then you've got to have a chat with the pompous Benkai, although the reviewer reckons it's a bit fruitless talking to him. After that, it's all about heading down to the water, through tunnels, and up ramps to have a word with Ushiwaka, the fisherwoman. She sets you a fishing task, 3 blue fish, 5 yellow ones, and 8 red ones if you can believe it. Sounds a bit tedious, eh? But apparently if you manage it she gives you the Achilles heel, a log to wallop Benkai with. Apparently 3 smacks should do the trick, and then Sasuke the mechanical ninja joins your team, although you can't use him right away, typical. There are little tips dotted around too, like chucking a barrel at Benkai as he comes down to catch him off guard, and a reminder about a fortune doll to grab. Apparently, after you've sorted the tourist center dragon problem, whatever that is, you can use it for teleporting, which is handy. Then there's the Koryuta the Dragon section, which is about battling this mini-boss colon. The advice is to just stick to the middle, avoid falling off, and use the chain pipe weapon on colon about 5 or 6 times, and you're sorted. Apparently you then find yourself on the ground with Koryuta in human form, and he gives you Yae's flute, which lets you call Koryuta as a taxi service to places you've already visited. A bit like a free bus pass, they joke. So it's all about getting through Town and tackling that dragon to progress in Goemon, a game that was pretty unique back then with its quirky Japanese style. This page then looks like a walkthrough for some game. Reckon it's probably Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64, going by the look of it. It's taking us through Fokipoke Village and Town 2. In Fokipoke Village, it seems you're getting a medal of flames from some god of money bloke after chucking 5 coins in a wooden box. Classic Goemon, eh? Then you're told to go over a dodgy bridge and through some doors. They even warn you about getting lost, which is helpful, I suppose. Maps weren't always the best back then, were they? Then it jumps to Town 2. Sounds like you're back to see Ushikawa, the fisherwoman. She's tiny now apparently, and you need to chat to her to start a sub-game involving pink and white sweets and avoiding a big-nosed fella throwing bombs. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? To get through a tiny door at the Dogo Hot Springs you need to use Ebisumaru's mini magic power. Makes sense, he's always up to something weird. They mention using shrinking pills too, to get through even smaller gaps inside the hot springs on your way to the Ghost Toys castle. Always with the Ghost Toys castle in it? It's all pretty standard guide stuff, telling you where to go and what to do, but it's got that slightly oddball Japanese game vibe, you know, the kind of thing that was a bit different to what we were used to back in the day. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine, bless it, is giving us the lowdown on Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64. Right then, Ghost Toys Castle, eh? They are telling you to use Goemon and his Medal of Flames to sort out the statues and ghosts in the corner. Apparently, there's not much to see in the first room, but you'll be back later. It mentions spooky hedonistic blokes in a water-filled room. Charming. Then it's all about getting keys, fighting ghosts, and grabbing fortune dolls, of course. Those were everywhere in games back then, weren't they? Warrant. They mention a bit with pool balls, which you've got a pot to open a door. Not exactly rocket science, is it? And there's the usual warning about falling off spinning platforms, naturally. Keep parry. Then we move on to the surrender robot Darumanyo. He's described as nasty looking but a bit of a pushover really, which sounds about right for these games sometimes. Apparently you need to use Ebisumaru and his camera to take a picture of him, dodge his bombs until he goes transparent, and then whack his heart. Good old Ebisumaru, always with the wacky gadgets. They recommend using Goemon's missiles to finish him off from a distance rather than getting too close to his hammer. Sensible advice that. So yeah, just your typical tips page for a quirky Japanese game on the N64 really. Good times. This page is all about snowboard kids for the N64. Right then, looks like they're calling it a gnarly game, dude. Bit much, isn't it? Seems like it was a surprise hit from Atlus, you know, those Japanese games companies, and they liked the graphics and racing. N64 Magazine is doing a guide to it, proper comprehensive by Daniel Glenfield. And at the bottom there's a little pointer saying they reviewed it in issue 14. There are a few of those weird looking cartoon characters on snowboards dotted about. They're a bit kooky looking, to be fair. Very Japanese style as they mentioned. Yeah, looks like a feature on how to get good at snowboard kids. The next page in N64 Magazine is all about picking your snowboarder in Snowboard Kids. It's a who's who guide to the 6 characters, breaking down their stats for speed, cornering, and tricks. First up is Slash, the all-rounder, a decent choice for beginners apparently, with average stats across the board. Then there's Nancy, who they say is the cornering queen, good for showing off, but a bit slow. Jam is next, described as slightly slower than Slash but better at cornering and tricks, so maybe a step up from Slash if you're getting the hang of things. Rhea. Linda is for those who can handle hard cornering, and she becomes a top pick before you unlock Cenobin. They say she's good for Quicksand Valley, whatever that is. Tommy, bless him, is the slow, heavy one, supposedly fast in theory but tricky to control, and they pretty much suggest sticking with Linda instead. Ouch, poor Tommy. Lastly, there's Cenobin, who sounds like the ultimate character, accessed by coming first on Ninjaland. He's got good speed and cornering, and fast magic moves, which makes him the best for trick scores, according to the magazine. They reckon he can't use special boards, which is a downside, but overall sounds like the one to aim for once you're good enough to unlock him. Each character section also lists a few of their magic moves with button combos, like Slash Spin, Nancy's Good, Jam's Great, Linda Spin and Tommy Spin. They've rated each character out of 5 as well, with Slash getting 3 out of 5 as a beginner choice, and Cenobin getting a full 5 out of 5, naturally. Tommy gets a measly 2 out of 5, and they say he's not worth the effort, which is a bit harsh, innit? Linda gets 4 out of 5. Perfect until Cenobin shows up. Nancy and Jam are both rated 2.5 out of 5. So there you have it, the lowdown on the Snowboard Kids crew. Choose wisely, eh? This page is from an old N64 magazine. It's a how-to section, giving some general tips for a snowboarding game. It looks like it's all about Snowboard Kids, which was a laugh back then, quite a daft take on snowboarding games. So the tips start with Jump Start, telling you to hammer the A button when it says go to get a head start. Classic stuff. Then there's Evasion, which is about dodging enemy shots by swerving or jumping when you see an exclamation mark. Bank stunts are mentioned, leaping off banks at just the right moment. White pipes apparently give you some cash and a speed boost if you ride straight and jump on them. Easy money, they reckon. Money for nothing is another tip about getting coins by doing regular jumps and tapping a C button, probably for tricks. Bit vague, that one. Shots is a reminder not to use power-ups too close to your target, otherwise you'll miss. Makes sense. Jumping advice is not to worry too much about lining up jumps because of invisible walls keeping you on track. Sounds a bit forgiving for a game. Reverse tells you how to go backwards by facing sideways, tapping A, and using hard steer. A bit fiddly, that sounds. Steering explains the analog stick controls, regular steering with left and right, and harder turns with diagonals, but warns about overdoing the diagonals and grinding to a halt. Finally, regaining speed is just saying if you get shot or turn too hard and stop, just tap A to get going again. All fairly basic stuff really, but back in '98 when N64 was king, you'd lap this sort of advice up if you were trying to get good at Snowboard Kids. Good times. This page is all about getting ahead in Snowboard Kids on the N64. Right then, power-ups, eh? Apparently they are key to winning, who knew? They've broken them down into blue items and red items. For the blue items we've got the Ghost, which is supposed to slow down the leader, but only if they aren't near the ski lift. Bit specific, that. Then there's Speed Fan for a temporary boost, Rock to trip people up, the Thief Mouse for stealing money, Invisible to dodge projectiles, and a Pan which squashes people. Sounds chaotic, doesn't it? And a Pan. Over on the red items side, we have the Parachute, which sends enemies skyward, Freeze Shot to turn them into ice blocks, spin the stick and hit A apparently. Then there's a Bomb for area damage and a Slapper which just shoves people over. And finally, the Snowman that turns your target into a snowman, rendering them useless. Right, sounds like typical cartoon racer mayhem. Warrensley. Then there's a section on special boards. Seems like Atlas hid a few rewards for the dedicated players. Special 1 foot costs 80,000 G, and you get it for completing the game. Apparently it's the best. Special 2, for 100,000 G, is for tricksters who can get a decent score in trick mode. It's a stunt board that lets you do gravity-defying stunts, but be careful on those high jumps, they say. And finally Special 3, costing a mere 1,000 G. Board that is useless, it says here. They reckon it's rubbish, no grip, out of shape, and useless except maybe in speed games. They even had a go at finding a secret with it, and found nothing. Good job, lads. Lastly, secret tracks. Quicksand Valley, an Egyptian level, you get that by coming first on all 6 tracks. Then, Silver Mount, with poor visibility, unlocked by coming first on Quicksand Valley. And finally, Ninjaland, Cenobin's domain, unlocked by coming first on Silver Mountain. So finish first a lot, and you get more tracks. Standard stuff really. Alright, back to the slopes then. This page then, is a bit of a how-to guide for Snowboard Kids on the N64. Right at the top it's going into stunts, which were a big deal to rack up the points and get power-ups. Apparently just tapping a C button whilst jumping gets you a few points, and they list some board grabs like Japan Air and tail grab and such, classic stuff. There's even a diagram of the N64 controller showing the analog stick positions for A-button stunts, which is a nice touch. Then it moves on to time attack mode, which, let's be honest, is where you spent most of your time trying to shave off milliseconds. They're saying your character matters, and if you can't be Sinobin, then Linda is your next best bet. Apparently Sinobin Board 3, or Special Board 1, are the boards to go for. Who knew there was so much science to it? The usual tips are there. Learn the course, get a jump start, corner properly, and use the speed-up fans. Hard steer is mentioned, basically power sliding, but they say use it sparingly. Good advice that. Finally, there's a section on tracks, giving you tips for Sunset Rock, Dizzyland, and Silver Mountain. For Sunset Rock, it's all about using a snow mound before the penguins as a mini-ramp. Very specific. Dizzyland is about avoiding a platform with coins, sticking to the right on the coffee cups, and a shortcut after the T-Rex. Sounds chaotic as Dizzyland always was. Silver Mountain is about using speed-up fans in the trench section and keeping right for jumps to avoid fences. Typical track-specific advice you'd pore over back in the day to beat your mates. Yep, pretty standard N64 Magazine fare. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine is having a look at the skill games in Snowboard Kids. Remember that game? Mad little racers on snowboards, pretty fun actually. Warrington Nolsa. They're running through 3 different skill challenges you can have a crack at. First up is Speed Game. Pretty self-explanatory, just trying to do a lap as fast as you can, grabbing speed boost fans along the way. Apparently not all fans are helpful though, classic trickery. They suggest using hard steering to get yourself pointed in the right direction and then easing off. Sounds about right. Next is Shot Game. This one's about pelting snowmen with snowballs. They reckon it's a bit limited, which is, well, fair enough, maybe it is a bit basic. Tips are to memorize where the snowmen are, and to use volleys of shots from a bit further back, to give yourself time to reload. Crashing into a snowman is a no-no, slows you down obviously. Lastly, there's Trick Game. This sounds like the best one of the bunch. It's all about racking up points doing stunts in the halfpipe, which was always good fun back then. They list the points you get for different moves, like a board grab for 1 point, stunt for 10, and magic moves for a whopping 40 points. Sinobin, one of the characters they mention, his magic move is a good one to use as it's quick and gets you double points compared to other characters. For getting some air in the halfpipe, they suggest going up the sides and pumping as you go, and for the big jump, you need to wait until you see jump appear and release the A button. They reckon you should be able to get over 4,000 points if you follow their advice, which is a decent score I suppose. Oh, and they say if you're lined up for the white pipe at the end you can double your score, so worth aiming for that. Lee. All in all, these skill games sound like a decent enough distraction from the main racing if you wanted a bit of a change. This page in N64 Magazine, blimey, takes me back. On one side, you've got a classic help wanted advert, N64 Magazine looking for experts to write game guides. Excellent rewards, it says. Makes you wonder what they were giving out back then, maybe a fancy N64 jacket, judging by the text further down. Hey! Then on the other side, it's a how-to piece about GoldenEye, that James Bond game that everyone and their dog played on the N64. It's all about finding hilarious quirks in GoldenEye, even after you've finished it on every difficulty and used all the cheat codes. They reckon there's still more fun to be had, even on Agent difficulty, messing around with the game's little oddities. They even mention the limit of 28 mines at once, which is a very GoldenEye kind of detail to get into. Proper deep dive for those who rinsed that game for months on end, which was most of us back then to be fair. This page shows a few cheeky quirks for GoldenEye 007, those golden days of split-screen multiplayer, and trying to find every little secret rareware hid in there. Quirk 1, Bungeeless, is all about using remote mines on the dam level to launch guards off the edge near the bungee jump, which is quite a laugh. Proper slapstick Bond. Then there's killing your captors and surrendering to nobody, on Surface 2, where you lob a grenade through a door after getting caught to take out the guards in the cutscene. A bit dark, maybe? But effective. Finally, Cruelty to Natalia, Part 1, in Bunker 2, where you can set a mine near the helipad door to give poor Natalia a bit of a shock when she comes through. Cheeky stuff, really showing off the emergent gameplay and silly fun you could have in GoldenEye. They're recommending all guns and infinite ammo cheats for these, so definitely more about messing around than proper stealth. Invincibility is suggested too, probably for when these quirks go a bit wrong. Good times, good times. The next page we've got here is diving into some cheeky quirks in GoldenEye 007. Seems like they're calling them quirks anyway, more like ways to be a bit of a git if you ask me. First up, it's captor killing. This one's on the statue level, and it's all about setting up proximity mines to off Mishkin and his cronies. Cheats needed are all guns and infinite ammo, which, let's be honest, who wasn't using those back in the day? It's basically showing you how to cheese the cutscene by placing mines before Mishkin shows up. A bit cruel to Mishkin really, but hey, all's fair in love and GoldenEye. Then there's Cruelty to Natalia. This one's a bit dark even for Bond. It's in the archives level, and it's about blowing Natalia out of a window with remote mines. You're supposed to lay a mine near a window, lure Natalia over, and then boom, watch her go flying. They even recommend invincibility and slow animation cheats to really savor the moment, which is a bit twisted if you ask me, but I suppose that's the point of these quirks, isn't it? There's even a diagram showing where to place the mines and screenshots of Natalia getting blasted out of the window. Bit harsh, but funny, in a dark humor kind of way, I guess. Lastly, it's, and just when she thought she was safe. This one's more of the same Cruelty to Natalia, again in the archives. This time you lay a bunch of remote mines before even finding her, then lure her to the window and detonate them as she's escaping. The page reckons you can get her with the 7th mine just as she's feeling smug. Again, diagrams and screenshots of Natalia getting blown up, because why not? So yeah, it's all about being a bit nasty to the NPCs in GoldenEye using mines. A bit of fun, I suppose, if you're that way inclined. Definitely remember trying stuff like this back then. Anything for a laugh with your mates, and to see what you could get away with in the game, wasn't it? This page in the mag is all about GoldenEye 007, remember that one? Still looks alright, doesn't it, even now? It's showcasing some of the funny glitches and oddities you could find in the game, calling them quirks. First up is Quirk 7, Bond's cutscenes. This one's on the depot level, and they reckon if you use fast or slow animation cheats and maybe invincibility you can get Bond acting a bit daft in the cutscenes. It's probably just a bit of fun to mess around with. Phew. Then there's Quirk 8, Kill Trevelyan, Xenia Urumov but not Natalia. That's a bit of a mouthful. This is on the train level, and if you use all guns and infinite ammo cheats, or invincibility or invisibility, you can apparently off everyone except Natalia in the cabin bit. Sounds like a right laugh trying to get that to work. Quirk 9 is Flying Characters on the cradle level. Invincibility and fast animation are needed, and apparently, if you chase Trevelyan without shooting him, he'll run off a ramp and just fly away. They say other guards do it too, just not as much. Classic. Finally, Quirk 10 is Flying Bond, also on cradle. This one needs fast or slow animation. You have to destroy the console, chase Trevelyan, kill him, and then watch Bond when he jumps for the helicopter. Depending on the animation cheat you've used, he either moves faster or slower than the chopper, making for a bit of an amusing end to the level. So yeah, just a bit of light-hearted fun looking at the daft things you could do in GoldenEye 007 back then. Always good for a giggle to see these old games breaking in funny ways. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 15, it's a bit of a how-to guide for GoldenEye 007. It's all about a quirk number 11 in their list, which is killing Baron Samedi for good, even in the cutscene where he's supposed to be chasing Bond. Apparently, contrary to what most people thought, you can actually properly off him. They give you a couple of methods, both involving mines. Method 1 is placing proximity and remote mines in a corridor, making a bit of a trap for poor old Samedi. Method 2 is similar, but more about setting off a chain reaction of mines while he's having a laugh at you in the cutscene. They even include a diagram, bless them, with little dots for you, proximity mines and remote mines. It's all quite clever stuff really. Then there's a section on plot inconsistencies and other amusing quirks. Under plot inconsistencies, they mention the statue scene. Apparently well-placed proximity mines can take out Alec and his henchmen before they even emerge. Cheeky. For other amusing quirks, they list a few: Bunker number 1, where Boris can be killed after messing up the mainframe security; Control Center, where Trevelyan can be offed in his lift using the golden gun from a distance; Facility, where you can shoot Aramov before he kills Trevelyan and keep Alec alive; and Silo, where General Aramov can be easily killed by just shooting him from afar. They also mention Runway, saying mines can be placed on the aeroplane to detonate them in the cutscene; and finally Cradle, with an invisible floor where guards can fall off if you stand in invisible mode. Classic GoldenEye madness really. Good times, good times. This page then is from an old issue of N64 Magazine, back when we were all buzzing about Nintendo's new console. It's a tips extra page, seems like they're trying to help us out with some of the trickier games. Raw buzz, ya. First up we've got WCW vs NWO. World Tour, remember that one? All those semi-naked blokes pretending to slap each other, as they put it. They've got tips like picking up weapons from the crowd, jumping out of the ring and grabbing something from the metal barrier apparently. Bit risky if you ask me. There's a bloody hell tip suggesting turning realism on to make it less parent-friendly. Cheeky. Regain Spirit quickly tells you to rotate the joystick Something we all probably figured out anyway. 3 and out is about getting out of a pin when the announcer says 1, repeating it 3 times for a cheeky win. Flying ring exit involves knocking your opponent off the edge of the ring, moving towards him, and then up plus A. Sounds a bit fiddly. Then there's play as Roth. Select DOA, and play through until you're faced with Roth and beat him. Apparently he becomes playable. And finally, floating enemy. Get them on the top turnbuckle, throw them off, and hold the analog stick. They'll rotate mid-air. Sounds like they're really getting into the glitches here, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? Warrior. Then we move on to NHL Breakaway, 98. This was EA's answer to Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey, wasn't it? They've got a cheat menu tip. Enter left C, right C, left C, right C, R, at the main menu for about 20 cheats, including fish-like characters and shrinking players. Player inspection lets you rotate the players for a closer look by pressing top C, bottom tie-in C, left C, or right C, and remove opponent goalie. Press start to pause, move the controller to the side and select pull goalie. A bit of a cheat, but hey, all's fair in love and hockey, right? Lastly, there's a golden oldie section for Turok. Dinosaur Hunter. They found if you enter RBNSMTH, at the cheat screen you get everything: invincibility, all weapons, infinite ammo, gallery and pen and ink mode. Turok, that was a decent shooter back then, running around blasting dinos, good times. Apparently Chris Gibson from Leicestershire is the one who sent that in. Cheers, Chris! This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's got the reader's top 10 tips. Classic stuff. Basically, it's all about us lot sending in our cheat codes and little tricks we'd found in games, hoping to get a mention and maybe one of those coveted N64 badges, as worn by Shigeru Miyamoto no less, they say. Bit of a laugh. Top tip of the month is for GoldenEye 007, naturally, everyone was obsessed with that back then. It's a code to unlock all 64 characters, blimey, all of them. Apparently you had to be looking at Mishkin or Moonraker Elite on the multiplayer character select screen while you entered it. Bit fiddly but worth it for a laugh with your mates. Then there's a tip for NFL Quarterback Club 98. Something about running past the ball to get an unfair penalty. Cheeky. Nagano Winter Olympics gets a shout for just using auto-fire to cheat at the bobsleigh. Hardly rocket science, that one. Borington Norcus. More GoldenEye tips, of course. One for the frigate level, getting the hostage out without a fuss, and another for the bunker level, about stealth and silence PPKs. Stealth in GoldenEye, who knew? Elwa. FIFA 98 gets a mention for an unlimited player attribute cheat, handy if you wanted to just thrash your mates easily. Mace. The Dark Age. Remember that fighter? There's a tip for unlocking Mordaskul, one of the characters. Nika. Diddy Kong Racing gets a tip for the pink flame boost. Everyone knew about that though, didn't they? Madden 64 has a weird one about changing the color of the joypad on screen by waggling the joystick. Never understood the point of that. And finally, Doom 64, with a proper cheat code to start you on the last level with everything maxed out, for when you just wanted to blast through it all. At the bottom there's a form to send in your own tips, to win a Macapad joystick. Probably not as good as the official pad, mind you. And those N64 badges again. They were really pushing those badges, weren't they? Good times, thumbing through these pages to find some dodgy advantage in GoldenEye or whatever we were playing that month. This page from N64 Magazine, right, is taking me back. So it's the Tips Extra section, and this month they're doing a guide to Tetrasphere. Remember Tetrasphere? Proper head scratcher that game was. I spent hours staring at the telly at stupid o'clock, trying to figure out those puzzles, and you'd always end up reaching for the magazine for a sneaky peek at the answers in the end, wouldn't you? It's funny to think now, but this was before the internet was really a thing in every home, so you couldn't just quickly Google it, and They've got a whole bunch of puzzle solutions for Tetrasphere laid out here, step by step with little screenshots from the game. Looks like they are going through the first 25 puzzles over a few issues because they reckon some of them are bloody annoying, which is putting it mildly. To all those blue squares, yellow rectangles and green bits you have to shift about. Simpler times, eh? Getting excited about puzzle solutions in a magazine. Still, saved you a few quid on the Nintendo hotline, I suppose. Classic N64 mag stuff, always had your back when you were stuck. This page, right, it's all about the Nintendo hotline back in the day, proper old school stuff. It's basically advertising their phone service where you could ring up and get help with your Nintendo games. They reckon they're experts and can sort you out if you're stuck. Open 7 days a week, no less. They've even doubled their staff, bless them. If you were really desperate, you could phone them up on 017-036-52222, not a premium rate number apparently, fancy that. Opening hours are listed Monday to Friday 12 till 8 p.m. and weekends 10 till 6 p.m. Crikey, those were the days. And for the modern gamer, they've got this new fully automated service for out-of-hours help, which is a bit cheeky, costing 50p a minute. You'd call 0891 669945 for that one, and better have a pen and paper ready to write down whatever robotic voice told you. Then there are puzzle solutions, looks like for some kind of puzzle game, showing you how to move blocks around in puzzle 19 and puzzle 22. Step-by-step instructions like, grab the top green rectangle and all that. Probably some obscure puzzle game on the N64. No one really remembers now. And then, of course, Duke Nukem 64 cheat codes. Gotta have cheat codes. This was peak cheat code era. They've got cheats for the cheat menu itself, invincibility, toggling monsters on and off, and toggling items on and off. It's all button combinations on the D-pad and C buttons, the usual fare. If you did it right, you'd get a whooshing sound or a blood-curdling scream. Charming. Those cheat codes were essential really for games back then, weren't they? Especially Duke Nukem. Blowing up pig cops was always better with infinite ammo. This page from N64 Magazine, right, takes me right back. It's all about the Skill Club 64, remember that? Seems they were trying to find the best N64 gamers in the UK. Bit of a laugh really, but we were all probably well into it at the time. Wortasler. Basically, to get in you had to prove you were decent at your N64 games. By completing challenges. There were different levels, bronze, silver and gold, depending on how many challenges you could conquer. Bronze was for completing 3, silver for 7, and if you were a proper hardcore player you went for gold with all 10 challenges. You even got a badge for your efforts, can you believe it? Boring challenges. They've got lists of people who've made it into each club. For the Bronze Club, there's a load of names, like Robert Gallagher from Southampton, Ben Cook from Shoreham BC, and loads more from all over. Seems like a decent bunch of lads and lasses got the bronze badge. Gatter. Then there's the Silver Club, bit more exclusive that one. Folks like Richard Davies from Rotherham, Philip Foster from Havant, and a few others are listed having completed 7 challenges. Right at the top is the Gold Club, just one name there, Simon Moore from Liverpool, the top dog, having smashed all 10 challenges. Good on him. Must have been glued to his telly for weeks. They even mention next month's challenge will be something to do with Yoshi's story, and they're having a laugh at how high the score is going to be. And a bit of a nod to renting games from Blockbuster Video to save a few quid. Because let's be honest, N64 games were blinking expensive back then, weren't they? It's a proper snapshot of the time, this page. All about showing off your skills and being part of the N64 massive. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page is all about Skill Club 64, right? It was a feature in the magazine where you could prove you were a proper N64 gamer and get yourself a badge, maybe even get on a league table if you were good enough. Looking at it now, it's quite quaint, isn't it? Brickadoo. So they've got 10 challenges listed, all for different N64 games, starting off with Super Mario 64, naturally, gotta get all 120 stars. Proof is a picture of Mario, with the magic 120 on screen. Then there's Diddy Kong Racing, gotta finish that in mirror mode and prove it with a save screen showing Adventure 2 and 47 balloons. Sounds a bit tedious, doesn't it? Bore. Next is Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the Yanks call it. Finish it with 1,500 hits or more. Picture of the final hits screen is your proof. GoldenEye 007, of course, they want you to finish the game on all difficulty settings, and picture proof is the 007 mode level editor screen. Fancy that, using the level editor for proof. Then ISS 64, finish all the scenarios and take pictures of the completed scenario screen. Seems like a lot of picture taking involved. Jowl. On the other side, we've got Mario Kart 64, record a time under 1 foot 20 inches 00 on Mario Raceway. Proof is the record screen. Pilot Wings 64, win gold medals on every event, and the medal screen is your proof. Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, complete the challenge mode in under 3 feet 0000, picture of the final screen with the time visible. No tips for that one, apparently you're on your own. Then Blastcore, win a gold medal on Neptune, proof is the medal award screen. And finally, Wave Race 64, break 1 foot 17 inches 00 on Sunny Beach time trial, and you need a picture of the record screen. Seems like they really loved taking photos of telescreens back then. They've got the rules bit, which says you need to do 3 challenges for a bronze badge, 7 for silver, and all 10 for gold. Blimey, all 10? That's dedication. They say you can use PAL or NTSC games, but if you use NTSC for Mario Kart and Wave Race, you gotta be faster. Naturally. And they are serious about no cheat carts, threatening ritual humiliation, and stoning out of the country if you're caught. A bit over the top, lads, weren't we? War. Then how to prove your achievements section. Basically point and click for photos. And for videos, it's all about connecting your N64 to the video and recording the TV screen. Proper faffing about compared to how easy it is now to record stuff. And at the bottom, there's an entry form. Hello there. I'd like to humbly put myself forward for the Bronze/Silver/Gold Skill Club 64 League. Bit dramatic, isn't it? You write your name and address, tick the games you've done challenges for, and send it in with your photographic or video proof. And they'll send you a badge and certificate if you're lucky. Those were the days, eh? Trying to get your name in the magazine for being good at games. This page from the magazine, right? It's all about, I'm the best, classic N64 mag section. They're going on about pushing the limits of gaming, comparing it to Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile back in the day. Which is a bit dramatic, isn't it, for video games? They're wondering if anyone can manage 50 seconds on Mario Raceway in Mario Kart, or 100,000 points in Wave Race 64 stunt mode. Ambitious stuff back then. Then there's a bit about star performance for Top Gear rally times. Someone called Colin Sales has apparently sent in some cracking times for the coastline and strip mine tracks. They're encouraging readers to send in their photos and drawings if they beat the times. Bit of a laugh really, but good on them for engaging with the readers. Down below they're highlighting new high scores. Gooey. They mentioned Diddy Kong Racing and GoldenEye 007 from reader submissions. Apparently, a bloke called Tom Richardson won a controller for being extra good at GoldenEye, killing loads of guards. There's also something about Snowboard Kids, and a competition for a MakoPad controller, remember those? Bit gimmicky, but Snowboard Kids was alright for a laugh. Then you've got all these tables showing top scores for Super Mario 64 and Wave Race 64. It's all PAL and American/Japanese versions, listing names and times for different tracks and modes like Foot Race with Cooper the Quick in Mario 64, and Sunny Beach in Wave Race. Loads of names listed there from all over the place, getting their names in print for being top gamers. Proper retro leaderboard stuff you don't see much of anymore. Good times, simpler times, eh? This page reveals the winners of the Lilac Wars Championship. Finally, it seems they were absolutely swamped with entries for this competition. Judging by the write-up, piles of boxes and parcels were everywhere. They make it sound like a right old mission, to sort through it all, to find the top 100 Lilac Wars players in the country. Looking at the results, it's just a long list of names and scores. Patrick Wessels from Holland came in first place with a score of 2041. Seems like there are a fair few from outside the UK who entered too, designated as import. They've listed all 100 top players with their names, locations across the UK and some from abroad, and their scores. Right at the bottom, in 100th place, we have Richard Farmer from Mexborough, with a score of 1477. Blimey, some dedication to get that high up the leaderboard. In Lilac Wars back then, it was a cracking game on the N64, proper 3D dogfighting, pretty impressive at the time. Good memories there. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 15, is the Club 64 letters page, a bit like the readers section. The letters are all about folks sharing their N64 experiences and tips. NSEPs. First up, there's a letter titled Very Simple, and it's from a group of lads, John Davies, Toby Poyser, Alex Rowley and Glenn Davies. They figured out a way to play GoldenEye Deathmatch with each player having their own telly. Remember split screen? Well, they're masking out parts of the screen with paper and tape so you only see your bit. Proper sneaky for GoldenEye ambushes. They're even suggesting using the radar cheat to make it even scarier, those cheeky devils. Then there's fantastic fun from Anthony Cadwallader in Grimsby. He's talking about dusting off his old Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES as we called it back then. He used a Super Famicom PAL converter to get 2 pictures on his telly. A bit of a faff, but good for getting more screens going. He mentions playing GoldenEye on his SNES adapter, which is a bit odd. Maybe he means on the N64 with an adapter, but who knows what he's on about really. Warrington. Pete Golding from Preston is celebrating conquering GoldenEye on Christmas Day. Good effort, Pete. He reckons he's probably one of 50,000 people who've written in about it, which is probably true given how massive GoldenEye was at the time. Robert Bailey in Essex is having a bit of a moan in Final Score about prizes. He's not impressed with the million tune odds or winning a badge, a bit stingy if you ask me. A badge for all that effort? Still, they're now offering a Game Master LX4 steering wheel with rumble effect as a prize next month. Much better. New. Chris O'Neill from Bournemouth is asking a question in chemistry set about GoldenEye. He's spotted a chemistry set in the facility level and wants to know why it's there. Ed, whoever he is, from the magazine, says it's just a bit of random fun from one of the programmers, no real reason. Typical rare humour. Finally, there's Quite Funny from Jonas Henriksson in Sweden, who sent in a comic strip. Bless him, Ed admits they can't understand a word of it as it's in Swedish, but they've printed it anyway for the Swedish readers, hoping it's not rude. Fair play. It looks a bit bonkers, all stick figures and speech bubbles, very Swedish. Overall, it's a typical letters page from back then, full of reader tips and questions about GoldenEye mostly, showing just how popular that game was. Nice little snapshot of N64 gaming back in the day. This page of the magazine is the letters section. Kicking things off is someone named Adam from Crew, commenting on Will Overton's photo from a previous issue, saying his lips looked a bit fake, bit harsh there, Adam. Then there's Darren from Blythe asking about import adapters for Japanese games, specifically Yoshi's Story. Seems he's a bit confused after seeing a picture in the last mag. Next up, Christopher from Banbridge is going on about how Diddy Kong Racing is better than Mario Kart 64. Which was a debate at the time for sure, wasn't it? Then Alex from Norwich chimes in on the same topic. Reckon Mario Kart 64 is still better, specifically the bonnets, which is a bit of a niche point, Alex. Moving on to Dream On, where readers suggest game ideas. First up, Craig from Trowbridge wants a Wario 64 game, set in Bowser's Castle. Sounds a bit like a reskin of Mario 64 to me. Then there's some madness from someone in Camel's Land wanting Revenge of the Mutant Camels 64 inches, which sounds utterly bonkers, mentions goats and cows as sidekicks, goodness knows what that's about. Finally, Lawrence from Dorset suggests a Robot Wars 64 game, based on the TV show, which actually sounds quite cool, designing robots to battle it out. Could have been a laugh. Ed mentions there was a similar game on the Saturn called RoboPit, wonder if that was any good. Lastly, Glenn from Manchester is having trouble taking photos of his TV screen for game competitions, complaining about half the screen being cut off. Ed's reply is all about shutter speed being too fast, and TV scan lines, bit technical for a simple gamer wanting to show off his high score. The page wraps up with the N64 board, which is like a reader's gallery, with mentions of artwork by Richard from Guildford, Marina from Winchester and a GoldenEye drawing. It's all pinned up like a notice board, a bit of reader interaction which was always nice to see back then. This page of N64 Magazine is a good old letters page, and a bit of an invention corner, classic stuff. Right in the letters, there's a bloke complaining about San Francisco Rush getting 82%, reckons it should be lower, mentioning the music and the dodgy controls compared to Top Gear Rally. Ed, the editor, is having none of it, saying 82% is a decent score. Another reader is moaning about GoldenEye being too hard, but Ed just shuts him down quick, saying it's just you. Someone else is asking about saving codes in Diddy Kong Racing, and it's a no-go, I'm afraid. Got to re-enter them every time, typical. There's also a funny one about someone's ears turning green if they say, manky bit odd, that, and a reader who reckons they're a true Nintendo fan because they were born when the N64 came out in Japan. Fair enough. Bit of a tenuous link though, eh? Then there's a section called Invention Corner, which is always a laugh. First up is the Talk Backpack. Imagine this, a rumble pack, but instead of just rumbling, it talks. Apparently, in games like Diddy Kong Racing, your character would shout things out. Sounds a bit mad, and probably annoying after 5 minutes. The other invention is the Dust Protector 64, which is basically a case for your N64 that folds out and turns into a stand. Says here it's hammerproof and waterproof, to protect your Mario Kart times. Overkill maybe. And lastly, they're showing off a travel set idea for GoldenEye multiplayer so you could play proper split screen on smaller TVs. Someone called Will Hemmick has come up with this splitter thing that makes it work. Clever idea that could have been useful for a GoldenEye session down a mate's house on an old telly. They're asking for more inventions and offering badges for the best ones. Good stuff, brings back memories of simpler times, tinkering with your N64 and reading through this mag. This page is a bit of a tell me this section from the magazine. Looks like readers are firing off questions about the N64 and upcoming games. First up, typical questions about the 64DD, when it's coming out, and if we'll get any demo discs on magazine covers like we used to back in the day. Sounds like it's June for Japan, but Europe is still a bit hazy, maybe next year sometime. And demo discs for the 64DD? Not too sure on that one apparently. Yeah. Someone else wants the address for Nintendo, which is fair enough if you needed to write to them for help or something. Then there's a load of questions about Bond games. Are there more coming? And are Nintendo actually working on Star Fox 2? Remember that one from the SNES? They reckon there aren't any more Bond games planned for the N64 right now, but Rare, who did GoldenEye, are using that engine for something else, maybe Star Fox 3 they're hoping. And what's good to play after GoldenEye? They're saying Duke Nukem 64 is alright and Turok 2. Don't expect N64 games to get cheaper anytime soon apparently. Mew. Next up, someone is asking about the GoldenEye review. They mentioned some cylinder bomb thrower and stun gun, but can't find them in the game. Turns out they're not actually in the game at all. Oops. There's a space left on the cheat menu though, so maybe more cheats are coming later. And what's the gun Bond is holding on the box? Apparently it's just a regular gun. And the AC-10 award? That's for grabbing the most body armor. Bit of a mix-up there then. War. More questions about upcoming games. Are they making more N64 games? Obviously they are. Hidden courses in Snowboard Kids? Maybe there are more to find? What about the Maker series of games, like in Japan? Unclear if they'll come over here as separate games or in one big package. And what will Holy Magic Century be called over here? No idea yet. And is it like Quest 64? Nope, different game. Diak. Finally, someone wants to know about Zelda. When's it coming out? Nintendo are still saying late April, hopefully, and they should have a review of the Japanese version in the next issue. So we'll see what that's like. Dreki. Over on the right side there's a typical inside the new issue box, talking about what else is in the mag, like Formula 1 stuff, a review of some fancy new Laserdisc/DVD player combo, and something about spy planes, plus the usual tech news, concept cars and gadgets, and of course some pictures dotted around, woman in a racing suit, N64 console, and a few game screenshots for Zelda, and some other bits and bobs. Standard magazine fare really. This page in N64 Magazine looks like they're doing an investigates piece, and it's all about the 30 most important Nintendo. Some things, probably people if you look at the text, they've got a rather chunky looking 3D Mario leaping out at you, and then what I reckon is supposed to be the Nintendo building itself, with a couple of fellas peering out of the windows, looking a bit like they've been caught in the act. Bit of dramatic writing they've gone for, calling them luminaries, and talking about dream machines being lubed and running smoothly. A bit over the top really, classic magazine stuff, but back then we lapped it up. Looks like they are about to give us a rundown of the top 30 most important people at Nintendo. This page from N64 Magazine, must be from around 1998 sometime, is all about the 30 most important people in the Nintendo universe. Bit of a grand title, isn't it? You've got Big Bowser looming at the top, which is a bit much. Then there's this building, and you can see Link from Zelda, what looks like Yamauchi and Miyamoto in suits, Fox McCloud from Star Fox 64, and some blue blob thing. The text is going on about power and importance, mentioning Yamauchi and Miyamoto. They're talking about games like Mario, Donkey Kong, Yoshi, Zelda, and of course Star Fox 64, all the classics really from back then on the N64. Seems like they're trying to figure out who's really in charge at Nintendo. This page from the magazine is doing a bit of an investigation into important Nintendo folk and things. Right at the top, number 30, we've got Mario Segali, the landlord. Apparently he's a bit of a legend for sorting out Nintendo's first American warehouse by being a bit of a pain about overdue rent. It's funny thinking about the mustachioed plumber and rent disputes back in the day. Number 29 is about Nintendo Power Magazine. They reckon it started as a way to advertise to the hardcore fans who sent in their warranty cards. Clever stuff really, getting the message out about upcoming games. It was a bit of a bible for Nintendo news back then, wasn't it? Then we've got Ganon at number 28, Link's scrumptious porcine enemy. They're banging on about him being a pig and bacon. Bit much maybe. But yeah, after the Zelda games we'd seen, expectations were high for Ocarina of Time and his next evil plan. Everyone was eager to see what they'd do with him in the new game. Duldertol. Number 27 is Alexei Pajitnov, the Tetris bloke. Good old Tetris, simple but brilliant. Apparently he was a mathematician in Russia during the Cold War, and invented it as a hobby. Mad to think it became such a massive hit, especially on the Game Boy. Everyone had Tetris back then. Warrington Dorkery. Number 26, it's Bowser, the princess-stealing dinosaur, King Koopa if you're that way inclined. They call him the Yang to Mario's Ying, a bit deep for a kid's game, but yeah, Mushroom Kingdom would be dull without him causing trouble. And they mention he's in Mario Kart 2, naturally. Fox McCloud is number 25, defending Corneria from attack. Star Fox on the SNES, that was a proper 3D leap at the time, wasn't it, with that fancy Super FX chip. They say it was in development for ages but was a big hit and sold loads in Japan. Good old Fox. Ginto. Number 24, Iriko Shoichiro, the president of Sega. They're talking about Sega and Nintendo being reactive to each other, and Sony too, and that if Sony does something, Nintendo and Sega will react. They call Iriko Shoichiro fresh blood at Sega, so Nintendo are keeping an eye on him and what Sega does next. Donkey Kong at number 23, Bad Ape, now reformed. They go way back to the original Donkey Kong game in 1981 with Pauline, and then say he's calmed down since and become a decent kart racer. They mention Donkey Kong Country, and rumors of a comeback maybe at E3, which would have been interesting. Finally, number 22 is Ken Kutaragi, president of Sony Computer Entertainment America. They call the PlayStation Nintendo's biggest rival, which it was becoming. They mention Sony saying they're only just getting started with the PlayStation and Nintendo needs to watch out if they want to beat them. Things were definitely heating up between them at that point. This page takes a look at some of the important folks in the world of Nintendo back in May '98. Kicking things off at number 21 is Yoshi, the green dinosaur. They call him cooler than Charlie Sheen. Bit of a weird comparison there. They reckon he's the perfect sidekick to Mario, maybe a bit too good for Luigi's liking. Mentioning Yoshi's Island on the SNES as a classic and wondering about his N64 debut, Yoshi's Story. Then at number 20 it's John Riccitiello, president of Electronic Arts. Blimey, EA making more money than God, according to this. They're the biggest third-party developer, and making a killing on sports games like the EA Sports lineup. Apparently their continued support will help Nintendo out. Jono. Number 19 is Masaya Nakamura, president of Namco. They're one of the big 5 third-party developers, and apparently they showed off their market power by backing PlayStation early on. Namco have said they're supporting the N64 now, but they were waiting until there were enough consoles sold to make it worth their while. With over 10 million N64s in homes worldwide, they reckon we can expect some classy Namco titles. Moving on to number 18, it's Link. They say he's starring in Nintendo's most important game of 1998. The N64 is lacking role-playing games apparently. Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation is mentioned as being massively successful in '97, and Nintendo needs a new Zelda game, and quick. They're saying it's going to be truly special for the machine, and to mark our words carefully, bit dramatic. Number 17 is Kenzo Toshiomoto, president of Capcom Japan. Capcom apparently helped define the industry, with games like Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Ghouls and Ghosts, Mega Man and Disney games on older consoles. They are one of the big 5 Japanese developers, and their support for the N64 would be a good thing. They've hinted at N64 games in the works but haven't said what yet, maybe waiting for E3 to show them off, and the writer wonders if we might see Ghouls and Ghosts 64. At number 16 it's Matsunaga Hikaru, Japanese Minister of Finance. A bit random to see him here. They're saying the video game industry is like the global economy, a roller coaster. Nintendo, like Sony and Sega, is a Japanese company. The Japanese economy has widespread implications for Nintendo, and with the current economic uncertainty, the government's role in regulating the economy is important. Deep stuff for a games mag. Number 15 is Shigeru Ota, president of Nintendo of Europe. He's one of the old guard from way back, and he helped Nintendo expand into risky new markets. Back in 1980 he was sent with Minoru Arakawa to sort out the flagging American console market. He helped turn the American market into a big deal. His success in America apparently means good things for Nintendo's commitment to Europe. Number 14 is Gunpei Yokoi, the late genius inventor, Nintendo. Sadly he's passed away. He was passionate and a visionary, and invented loads of Nintendo's hardware, like Game & Watch, the Love Machine, and the Game Boy. He got Nintendo into the toy business with the Ultra Hand. They say he was always looking for new ways to entertain people, and his legacy to Nintendo is massive, despite the Virtual Boy being a bit of a misstep. Finally at 13 we have Hiroshi Imanishi, head of R&D1 at NCL, General Affairs Manager Nintendo. Apparently he's a long-standing key player at Nintendo, hired by Yamauchi, before Miyamoto was even noticed. He founded the games division way back in 1969, and is now Yamauchi's right-hand man in corporate stuff. Never heard of him myself, but there you go. This page from N64 Magazine. Right, let's have a look. Seems to be one of those investigates features, counting down some important figures or elements in the Nintendo world at the time. Right at the top, number 12 is Kuniaki Kinoshita, president of Konami. Apparently Konami are one of the big 5 Japanese developers, showing commitment to the N64. They're looking to bring Castlevania 64 and Hybrid Heaven to the system. Castlevania on the N64, that was something people were looking forward to. And Hybrid Heaven, Castlevania 4 and well, we'll see how that turns out, won't we? Castlevania. Number 11 is Takashi Tezuka, a star designer at Nintendo. He's considered as talented as Miyamoto himself, which is saying something. Apparently he's the hands-on director, while Miyamoto is the producer. Games mentioned include Zelda 3 on the SNES, Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and Pilot Wings and Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's Story. He's working with Miyamoto on Zelda 64, which was massive news at the time. Rare. Then we've got 10 and 9 together, Tim and Chris Stamper, from Rare, the joint CEOs. Rare were the Golden Boys back then, weren't they? Founded as Ultimate Play the Game, they became huge. Everyone was quoting Rare as the example to follow. GoldenEye and Diddy Kong Racing are mentioned as platinum sellers, and Nintendo owns a 20% stake in them. They were definitely churning out the hits, weren't they? Number 8 is just Mario. Needs no introduction, apparently. Well yeah, everyone knows Mario. It talks about him being more than just a game character, he's Nintendo itself. Mentions his Dunga-wearing plumber image, and how he's infected popular culture. Then it randomly mentions Aero the Acrobat and Crash Bandicoot as games that haven't rivaled Mario. Bit of a strange comparison really. Number 7. The Player. Bit meta this. It's about us, the gamers. Saying we are the reason Nintendo is what it is today, because we bought all those cartridges over the last 20 years. Without us, apparently, Miyamoto would be a homeless bum. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Number 6 is the analog stick. Ooh, silken 3D movement. They're really laying it on thick. Howard Lincoln apparently said it would be like nothing we'd ever seen before. It mentions PC snobs enjoying analog control already, but it took the N64 and Super Mario 64 to bring it to the masses. Says developers wouldn't be exploiting analog control without it, and N64 games wouldn't be the same. And then a little dig at Sony saying you just haven't got it. Bit cheeky. Finally, number 5, Howard Lincoln, CEO of Nintendo of America. Grandfather Lincoln, eh? Says don't let looks deceive you. He's got more balls than a pachinko machine. Bit strong language for a games mag. Says he's got keen business savvy, sharp analytical method and extensive legal experience. Apparently he's helped Nintendo battle through judicial onslaughts. He's the Western face of Nintendo and part of a power trio dominating Nintendo of America. Sounds like a serious bloke. So yeah, that's the page. A bit of a who's who of Nintendo and some of the key elements of the N64 at the time. All pretty exciting back then, wasn't it? Wonder what happened to all those bold predictions. This page is about the big cheeses at Nintendo, the top dogs who made it all happen back in the day. We're talking about the 30 most important people apparently, and this page features 4 of them, starting with number 1, Shigeru Miyamoto. Blimey, where would Nintendo be without Miyamoto? The article bangs on about his incalculable contribution and how he makes universally delightful video games. It mentions Zelda and Super Mario 64, as if you needed reminding, like those weren't the system sellers. Apparently even Spielberg is put to shame, according to this. Bit strong maybe, but Miyamoto was and still is a legend. Fair play. They're saying he's now focusing on Zelda again, to shake up the video game community, even more than Mario 64 did. No pressure then. Alright. Moving on to number 2. Hiroshi Yamauchi, the big boss man himself, president of Nintendo. This fella took over Nintendo at 21, sacked half the management and turned Nintendo into this global monster company. No messing about then. They call him a demon in a suit who calls employees llama if they mess up. Sounds like a right hard case, but effective. You can't argue with the results, can you? Apparently he instills this sense of self-responsibility by just being terrifying. Classic. D. Number 3 is Peter Main, the marketing whiz-kid from Nintendo of America. This is the bloke apparently responsible for the N64 being such a success in America through sheer marketing power. They reckon he invented event video game hype with Super Mario 3 and lists a load of classic games he marketed like NES, Super Mario Bros., and Zelda, the gold cart version no less. He's the one who got $20 million promo budgets apparently, which is a lot of wonga, even back then. Lastly, number 4. Minoru Arakawa, president of Nintendo of America. They say without his dedication, Nintendo wouldn't even have made it to America until the late 80s. He married into the Yamauchi family, so no pressure there then. Apparently he took Nintendo into the Wild West arcade market, and then the console market, a proper uphill struggle they reckon. There's a funny story about him falling asleep under a tree during a walk with Howard Lincoln, even at the US Open Golf Championships. Bit of a character then. This page screams of 1998, doesn't it? Big and bold, proclaiming Le Football, with IS-98 and World Cup 98 battling it out on the N64. Football games were always a bit of a talking point back then, weren't they? These two were supposed to be the top dogs. Then we've got a mention for GT64. Wayne Gretzky 98 ice hockey on the N64, which was trying to muscle in on the SNES's hockey crown, bless it. Apparently it was due out in April, but they were still waiting. Classic games industry delays, eh? Over on the right, there's an index for issue 15, which is a bit behind the times for issue 16, but magazines were magazines. Looks like they covered a Banjo-Kazooie preview, which everyone was obviously hyped for, and Forsaken, F-Zero X previews, the usual races that were expected on the system. GASP. Fighters and NEX Dream got reviewed, can't say I remember either of those being classics. E. There was a GT64 future look. Probably about Gran Turismo 64, which everyone was dreaming of but never quite materialized as we expected. Hotline tips, always useful for those tricky bits. GoldenEye 007 got a mention for hidden quirks, as if we hadn't all rinsed that game dry already. Snowboard Kids got a how-to guide, that was a pretty fun one. Looks like they were investigating the gaming underground, sounds a bit dramatic. Looney Tunes Space Race and Space Circus previews. Kids stuff probably. Lilac Wars results Star Fox 64 to us and them, everyone loved that. Mission: Impossible Special Investigation, that film Tyne game. Olympic Hockey Review, Quake 64 Review, the obligatory console ports of PC hits. Suzume, Tyson Puzzle Dharma Review, a Japanese puzzler, likely a bit obscure for most of us. Turok 2 Preview, that was a big deal at the time. Dinosaurs and Gore, what's not to like? Wetrix Review, a decent puzzler. And Yoshi's Story Review, Nintendo platforming goodness. So yeah, a pretty standard issue for the time, covering the usual bases of what was hot and what was coming soon on the N64.